undefeated middleweight champion of the world.
If you talk to boxing fans nowadays about Gennady Golovkin, you'll get very mixed responses. One side telling you how great he is, and then another side telling you that he's never fought anybody. So today we'll be doing a deep dive into the resume of Gennady Golovkin. Now, I know his career isn't over yet, and he could still have another career-defining victory over Charlo or Andrade coming up, but I thought I should do a video on his opponents and accomplishments so far while we wait for his next opponent to be announced. He started his pro career in 2006 at the age of 24. In his first 23 fights outside of the US, he would get 23 wins and 20 knockouts. Unfortunately though, because of promotional issues, he wasn't allowed to fight outside of Germany until 2012, and didn't get his first shot at a title until 2010 when he fought Milton Nunes for the interim WBA World Middleweight title. And although this is only for the interim belt, I thought I'd include it in because from this fight on, this is where Gennady's career really started to heat up. Less than a minute in, Gennady would land 2 flush left hooks to the head and send Nunes down. He got up on shaky legs and referee Russell Mora decided to stop the fight. It was a first round knockout for Gennady Triple G Golovkin. 4 months later, in December of that year, Golovkin would be back in the ring against 14-2-1 Nilson Tapia for now the WBA regular world middleweight title. From the opening bell, Golovkin would show a fantastic jab, landing on Tapia at will it seemed with it, and even though Tapia was landing a good shot from time to time, Golovkin was totally dictating the pace. For the first 2 rounds, Golovkin was putting pressure on Tapia and landing power shots, but at the beginning of round 3, he would land a vicious body shot on Tapia that seemed to be the beginning of the end. 30 seconds later, Gennady would land a left hook followed by another devastating body shot that put Tapia down. Tapia would not be getting up, and it'd be a 3rd round knockout for Gennady Golovkin, successfully defending his title for the first time. And because this video is on his resume, I'm going to be giving each of his opponents a grade from now on, considering this was his first title defense. I give Tapia a C-, but it's only his first title defense, and this is only the beginning for G. His next fight would be 6 months later, and he would have his biggest test to date when he fought Kasim Uma, a 27-7-1 veteran. And right away, this fight became a war. And just so you know that in these clips I'm going to show, these are not all the punches that landed. I only showed the really flashy punches, and I freeze framed the punches just so you can see how big they really are. This was such a war, and so many punches landed, it'd be a waste to do a whole punch count in this video. So here's this. But anyway, on to the fight. Kasim Uma is a good fighter. He was 32 and a half years old at the time of this fight, so that was in his prime or at least very close to it. Previous to this fight, he had been a pro since 1998, so 13 years. He has also fought some very recognizable names that you might know if you're a hardcore boxing fan. He had a decision win over Marco Antonio Rubio in 2006, a 12-round decision loss against Jermaine Taylor in 2008, and a 10-round decision loss to Vanes Martirosyan in 2010, where he even ended up dropping Martirosyan in round 9, something that Jermell Charlo, Lara, and Andrade couldn't do. There's other good names on his resume that he fought that I could go over, but I want to focus more on the fight. So we know Uma's experience, and from the opening bell, he's landing flush shots on the chin of Golovkin. It was very surprising to say the least. He was hitting Golovkin with his hardest punches clean on the chin, but Golovkin barely blinked. The dude's never been dropped in 400 plus fights amateur or pro, what did you expect? But this was early on, so no one had really seen how good his chin was yet. This definitely wasn't a one-sided fight though, because through 5 rounds it was probably 3-2 for Uma, and he was taking bombs from Golovkin too, so it was surprising to see how good Uma's chin was. If you talk to Golovkin detractors, one of the things they'll say is, "A prime Golovkin was getting beat by Kasim Uma. He's trash." And it makes you think, yeah, how was Golovkin struggling so much with Kasim Uma? Well, after talking to Golovkin's promoter on Twitter, and after doing my research, I found out why this fight was so competitive considering the level difference. So, before the fight, Golovkin had visa issues and was stuck in the airport for 2 whole days before the weigh-in. and he didn't eat anything there because there were no scales at the airport. And it's unknown if he even slept at all the preceding days for the fight because he was stuck at the airport the whole time. Golovkin and his team finally arrived in Panama City only 1 hour before the weigh-in, and it's rumored that Kasim Uma's team had something to do with the airport fiasco. Gennady never made excuses about this, but this was talked about before the fight even happened. So, it's not even an excuse, it's a fact that he had no sleep and barely ate before the weigh-in and the fight. Before the beginning of round 9, the doctors came in the ring to check on Uma's jaw because it was possibly broken. So even though Uma was only down about a round or so, taking this many shots from Golovkin had an effect, and we were starting to see it. And even though the first 8 were competitive, Golovkin's shots took their toll, and in the 9th round, Golovkin started to destroy Uma. And even though Uma amazingly survived round 9, G would not let him survive the 10th. He was knocking Uma back from pillar to post and landing huge right hands and left uppercuts. And after a mean assault on the ropes, the referee stepped in and stopped the fight. It was his 10th round knockout for Gennady Triple G Golovkin. Kasim Uma was hospitalized immediately after the fight and retired for 2 years. And we had so much time to talk about this fight during the highlights, so there's not really much else to say. I give Kasim Uma a B- as an opponent. His next fight would be 6 months later against 23-3-2 Luan Simone. It would be G's 3rd defense of the WBA regular world title, but also the vacant IBO belt would be on the line in this fight. Simone was a decent fighter who went 12 rounds with Arthur Abraham and got a draw with Darnell Boone, a fighter who had knocked out Adonis Stevenson and knocked down Andre Ward. But anyways, on to the fight. G would be in the first... Whoa. Well, this was a quick night. G landed a perfect counter left hook that knocked Simone out. I give Simone a C as an opponent. On May 12, 2012, Triple G would make his 4th defense of his WBA belt and the 1st defense of his IBO belt. He would face 19-6 Makoto Fujigami. Fujigami hasn't fought anyone of note before or after he fought Golovkin, so I don't know much about him. He's just a journeyman. But at this time, Triple G was still having visa issues with going to the USA, so there wasn't many people he could fight. With less than a minute left in the second, Triple G caught Fujigami with 2 right hooks that sent him down. Fujigami survived the rest of the second, but Golovkin smelled blood. Gennady dropped him 2 times in the 3rd and earned himself a 3rd round knockout. He successfully made his 1st defense of his IBO belt and 4th defense of his WBA belt. Fujigami was just a journeyman, so I give him a D.
Tough task in front of him. This Golovkin kid is the truth.
All right, let's take a look at the tail of the tape.
4 months later in September, Gennady would finally arrive to the US, making his HBO debut against 28-1 Grzegorz Proksa. Proksa was a decent fighter. 2 years prior to this fight, he had a 3rd round knockout over Sebastian Sylvester and ended up dominating him in the process, something Daniel Geale and Felix Sturm couldn't do. Triple G was 30 years old in this fight, and it was his first time fighting in America, so he had to make a good first impression on the American fans. And that's exactly what he did. After this fight, he would be ducked like the plague, but before we go into that, let's get into this fight. With less than a minute left in the first, Triple G landed a flush crisp jab on Proxa that seemed to shake him up a bit. Triple G followed up and Proxa hit the canvas. It definitely seemed more like a slip than a knockdown, but it was officially ruled a knockdown. After comfortably winning the second and third and having a knockdown on the first, G would get to his man in the fourth, landing 2 vicious body shots and uppercut, followed by a mean left and right combo that sent Proxa down. Proxa would get up and fight back, showing a bunch of grit and determination. But near the end of the fourth, G would land another vicious body shot that hurts Proxa. But Proxa kept his composure for the 10 seconds left of the round and survived the fourth. With less than a minute left of round 5, G would land a right hook, then a left hook that hurt Proxa. G smelled blood and landed a perfect left hook that dropped Proxa. Proxa, being the absolute warrior he is, got up again, but referee Charlie Fitch had seen enough and stopped the fight. It was a 5th round knockout win for Gennady Golovkin. Triple G had successfully made his 5th defense of his WBA belt and the 2nd defense of his IBO belt. I give Proxa a C. It was a perfect fight to show the American boxing fans just who Triple G was, and it gave him some good experience. After the fight, G did a post-fight interview with Max Kellerman. Max told Gennady that because he looked so good, it might be hard to get some good opponents in the ring with him, but Gennady stated that he would fight anyone from 154 to 168 pounds, and gave some names on who he wanted to fight. But unfortunately, Max was right, and as you'll soon find out, Triple G was massively ducked by every big name in those weight classes.
I'm happy now.
It might be difficult for you to get guys to get in the ring with you right now, even in this very deep, talented middleweight division. You said that you told me yesterday that you'd fight anyone from 154 to 168 pounds. Who do you have in mind?
Seriously, doesn't matter who next, you know. I'm ready. I'm stay here. I'm in America. I'm happy now. I'm ready now.
Would you fight anyone from 54 to 68?
Yeah, everybody.
Anyone?
Of course, anyone, yeah. Of course.
If Andre Ward beat Chad Dawson, you'd fight him?
Yeah, what not? Yeah, Andre Ward is a good man. I beat Andre Jarrell, you know. I'm ready now.
That was an amazing performance. Thank you for that, and I'm sure we'll see you again real soon.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much, everybody. You know, thank you so much, Special HBO. I love you.
How can you not love this man? I mean, what an absolute legend. But one thing I want to say that I forgot to add before we go on to the next fight is that instead of Proxa, Triple G was actually supposed to fight Dmitry Pirog. If you don't know who Dmitry Pirog is, he was a very good fighter who actually ended up knocking Daniel Jacobs out cold back in 2010. He was 20-0 and a very good fighter, but in his very last fight in May of 2012 against Nobuhiro Ishida, he ended up injuring his back and ended up retiring. Golovkin detractors to this day still argue that if Pirog never hurt his back and Triple G fought him, that G would have lost. But in reality, Triple G would have destroyed Pirog. It's just too bad we never saw it. As stated previously, no one wanted to fight G at the time, and I wanted to try to make this series just on who he actually fought and ducking aside, but when I looked into it, I really do have to bring it up, because this dude was probably the most avoided fighter in boxing history. If you want me to go into detail, someone on BoxRec made a list of all the champions that ducked Golovkin, and I recommend you check it out, because it is very surprising. I put the link in the description below. But after the Proxa fight, no elite fighter was willing to step up to fight Golovkin. He just had to fight the best he could get. And the best he could get was Gabriel Rosado. Gabriel Rosado was a top 10 ranked junior middleweight, and when the opportunity to fight Golovkin came up, he accepted the challenge and decided to move up a weight class for the fight. This wasn't surprising at all though, because Gabriel Rosado is one of the biggest badasses in boxing and will fight anyone. Gabe was 21-5 at the time and had some decent experience, so it definitely wasn't a bad opponent. On January 19th, 2013, Gennady Golovkin would make his 6th defense of his WBA regular world middleweight title and the 3rd defense of his IBO middleweight title when he fought rough Philly fighter Gabe Rosado. From the opening bell, Golovkin would start stalking Rosado, cutting off the ring and making Rosado overthink everything. This fight would also be a good display of the best punch in boxing, Gennady Golovkin's jab. In round 2, G would land a stiff jab on the right eye of Rosado, which caused a cut, which would turn out to be the story of the fight. Rosado was a tough guy, so he was managing to take all these monster shots and keep his composure, even landing some decent shots of his own from time to time. In the third, Golovkin would land a hard, clean right hand on Rosado. Rosado shook his head, saying it didn't hurt him, but G would soon land a big flush jab that put Rosado on shaky legs. Rosado decided to fight back before getting hit with another huge counter jab that had him hurt even more, but he managed to survive the sequence by Golovkin. Golovkin was dominating Rosado with the jab. Rosado just couldn't find a way around it. But being the tough warrior he is, Rosado rallied back and did very good in rounds 4 and 5. He didn't do enough to win those rounds, but he landed some pretty big punches. Triple G didn't respect him or his power at all, so he just walked through it all. The jabs and power punches began to take their toll, and you could see just by Rosado's face how effective they really were. At the beginning of 6, Golovkin had had enough and began to thoroughly beat up Rosado. 10 seconds in, he landed a brutal right uppercut that shook up Rosado. When round 7 began, you could tell something was going to happen, considering how messed up Rosado's face was. Golovkin started landing uppercuts and jabs at will on Rosado and pressured him the whole way throughout. After landing a vicious right hand with 30 seconds left in the 7th round, Rosado's corner had seen enough and threw in the towel, and you see that notorious clip of Rosado walking back to his corner with his face covered in blood. It was soon discovered after this fight that Golovkin had the flu during fight week. And no, this is not an excuse. In fact, there's a whole HBO documentary about it. I left a link in the description if you're interested. But still, even with the flu, it was still a great performance. I would give Rosado a C+ as an opponent. Only 2 months after fighting Rosado, Triple G would be back in the ring against tall and lengthy 24-8-2 Nobuhiro Ishida. In Ishida's last fight, he fought 19-0 Dmitry Pirog, a fighter who we previously mentioned before in episode 2. Ishida gave Pirog a tough fight and ended up going all 12. This would also be Pirog's last fight due to a back injury, and it's unknown whether that happened due to fighting Ishida or not. Then in the fight before that, Ishida would go all 12 rounds against 40-2 Paul Williams. And then one fight before that, he ended up absolutely destroying the upcoming 27-0 prospect James Kirkland in 1 round. So Ishida definitely wasn't a light touch. On March 30th, 2013, Gennady Golovkin would make his 7th defense of his WBA middleweight belt and the 4th defense of his IBO belt against Nobuhiro Ishida. And right away, you see the massive size gap between the two. Golovkin had never fought anyone this tall before, so you think it'd discourage him from using his jab, right? But you gotta remember, G has the best jab in boxing. After 2 rounds of nothing but power shots and killer jabs, Ishida was still coming forward. One of the things that made him so durable was his chin and his physical strength. Previously mentioned in the Pirog and Williams fight, neither of those guys were able to hurt him with a single punch. But Triple G's built different. With less than a minute left in the third, Triple G caught him with a perfect right hook that knocked Ishida out cold, outside the ring, right by the doctor, in what would be a knockout of the year contender. This fight was vintage Golovkin. Insane power, fantastic boxing IQ, great defense, an amazing jab, and just about everything else. I give Ishida a C+ as an opponent. After this fight, Ishida would have one more fight at middleweight before he moved all the way up into the heavyweight division. Going into his 8th defense, Golovkin hadn't really fought a top 10 middleweight yet because all of the top fighters were avoiding him, and it was pretty unfair to Golovkin. 3 months after fighting Ishida, in June of 2013, a top 10 middleweight would finally step up to the plate to fight Golovkin. It was 29-4 Matthew "Mac the Knife" Macklin. Macklin was the 8th ranked middleweight in the world according to Ring Magazine at the time, and 3 fights before Golovkin he would fight Felix Sturm for the WBA super middleweight title and get robbed in Sturm's backyard. Sturm also being one of the champions who avoided Golovkin at all costs. Then after the Sturm fight, he would fight the long-reigning 48-2-2 middleweight champion Sergio Martinez, another champion who ducked Golovkin for a long period of time. Macklin would do well against Martinez, winning rounds and landing some big shots on Sergio in the process, before ultimately being stopped in the 11th round. After that fight, he would knock out a decent fighter whose name I can't pronounce in the first round. Then came the Golovkin fight. On June 29, 2013, Gennady Golovkin would make his 8th defense of his WBA belt and the 5th defense of his IBO belt against the number 8 ranked middleweight in the world, 29-4 Matthew Macklin. Macklin would start the fight off, trying to come forward and bully Golovkin the way Golovkin has done with previous opponents in the past. He even tried to make it a dirty fight at times by hitting and holding, which is something Golovkin never does. But in less than a minute of Macklin trying this tactic, Triple G started to heavily back him up, and Macklin began to see that you can't push back a man with the strength of Golovkin. Triple G started landing his jab at will, and Macklin seemed to be getting mentally stressed at the pressure Golovkin was putting on. With 15 seconds left in the first, Golovkin would land a clean straight right hand on Macklin that knocked Macklin off balance and made him realize that Golovkin isn't just a normal fighter. Even though Golovkin was dominating the action, Macklin was and is a tricky fighter, and managed to get through some shots on Golovkin. Just like always though, Golovkin would show an absolutely amazing jab from round 1 on, landing at will and snapping Macklin's head back every time. Things would begin to heat up in round 3, and the guys were fighting on the inside, where G was landing a bunch of good body shots. But the more Macklin came to Gennady, the more vulnerable he'd be, and around a minute into round 3, G would get Macklin on the ropes and land an absolute peach of a body punch, breaking 2 of Macklin's ribs. Macklin would not be getting up, and it'd be a 3rd round knockout for Triple G in another knockout of the year contender. I give Macklin a B-. He was a top 10 fighter and had been in there with some of the best. Amazingly, Golovkin would fight again in 2013, and this time it would be against his hardest hitting opponent to date. On November 2nd, 2013, Gennady Golovkin would make his 9th defense of his WBA belt against the number 12 ranked middleweight in the world, 25-3 Curtis Stevens. There was a lot of trash talk by Stevens leading into this bout, and that's what most likely got him the fight. Stevens was a big puncher, so it'd be a test for Gennady to see how he'd fare against a good middleweight with punching power. Stevens was a left hooker and loved to counter the right hook to land his left, and you see him trying to land it all throughout this fight. With a minute left in the first, Stevens would land a right-hand bomb on Golovkin, but didn't faze G at all. After a competitive round 1 but clear G round, round 2 would be much of the same. Pretty competitive, but G's winning because of his jab. But Gennady seemed a little cautious of Stevens' power and wasn't backing Curtis up like he did with his other opponents. But it didn't matter because with less than a minute left in round 2, Triple G would land 2 clean left hooks to the head of Stevens that sent him down, with him giving that infamous look after feeling G's power. He was clearly hurt because once he got up, he looked at the clock to see how much time was left in the round, but when he got up, G went after him. Then all of a sudden on the ropes, Stevens would land his perfect punch, a counter left hook right on the chin of Golovkin. I still say this is probably one of the hardest punches Golovkin ever took in his career, but the fact that it didn't even hurt him just shows you how much of a monster he is. Stevens was saved by the bell from a possible stoppage from G, but from this point on, it was clear that Golovkin didn't take Curtis's trash talk very kindly. There's not much to say, so I'll just show you the clips of this loudmouth getting destroyed. After 8 grueling rounds of punishment, Curtis Stevens' corner stopped the fight. It was an 8th round knockout for Gennady Golovkin, and Curtis Stevens was a top 15 middleweight in his prime, so I'd give him a grade of C+. On February 2nd, 2014, Gennady Golovkin would make the 10th defense of his WBA belt against number 12 ranked middleweight in the world, 22-3 Ousmane Adama. Adama's only had one notable fight before this, and it was 2 years prior where he lost a unanimous decision against 26-1 IBF champ Daniel Geale. He wasn't an elite fighter, but once again, no one wanted to fight Golovkin at the time, but Adama was a top 15 ranked middleweight. 1 second before the bell in round 1, Triple G would land a flush right hand that sent Adama down. Adama would get up, and that would be the end of round 1. Gennady would show an absolute masterclass on how to use a jab. He always shows a good jab, but I definitely think you could argue that this is the best jab performance of his career. Adama would land a shot here and there, but Golovkin was just pressuring him the entire time and making things extremely uncomfortable. But seriously, his jab was absolutely amazing. I would say he landed it a lot more than he missed it. After dominating Osumanu for 5 rounds, G would drop Adama once again with a sharp left hook in round 6. Adama would get up and show insane grit by surviving the next minute and firing back shots of his own. At the beginning of round 7, Triple G would land a stiff jab that would end up dropping Adama. So saying he has the best jab in boxing really is an understatement. You could easily say he has the best jab in boxing history, and I mean that. About a minute later, Gennady would follow up with 2 left hooks that made the referee stop the fight. Gennady Golovkin had successfully made his 10th defense of his WBA regular world middleweight title, now upgrading him to the WBA super world middleweight title. I give Adama a C, but this is where Golovkin's career would finally take off. Going into his 11th title defense, it seemed that Matthew Macklin was the best opponent that Golovkin had faced so far. Once again, this was not Golovkin's fault at all, due to all the top names ducking him, but it was still sad that no one in the top 5 in middleweight would fight him. But one man in the top 5 did end up taking the Golovkin fight, while Golovkin was at the peak of his career. It would be 30-2 former WBA and IBF champ Daniel Geale.
Accomplishments on his resume, not least of all, going to Germany and beating Felix Sturm. He beat his countryman Anthony Mundine. Learned that he had the power to knock down Darren Barker.
And down goes Darren Barker.
Geale was the number 5 ranked middleweight in the world according to Ring Magazine at the time, and held wins over Anthony Mundine, Felix Sturm, Sebastian Sylvester, and a close decision loss to Darren Barker, another champ who ducked Golovkin. But Geale stepped up, and on paper, this should have been the toughest test of Golovkin's career. In round 1, Gennady would start to cut the ring off on Geale, while at the same time showing his amazing jab and great footwork. Only 15 seconds into round 2, G would get Geale on the ropes and land 2 great straight right hands, followed by a grazing right hook behind the head that sent Geale down. Geale got up and claimed it was a rabbit punch, and even though it was clearly by accident because Geale ducked his head and kinda moved into it. But even though it landed, it clearly didn't look like that big of a punch to put Geale down. I put it in super slow motion so you guys can see it again. What do you think? Did he fake it? After 2 one-sided rounds, Geale would start to do better in round 3, doing a great job at slipping and ducking Golovkin's punches, and even catching Gennady with a really nice left hook. With less than a minute left in the third, Gil would catch G with a great right hand, but as soon as he landed it, G came right back and landed the same right hand that put Gil down. Daniel would get up on shaky legs, and when asked by the referee if he wanted to continue, Daniel Gil said no, and the referee stopped it. Golovkin had successfully made the 11th title defense of his WBA Super World Middleweight title. Daniel Gil was a solid win, Gil being a former unified champion and being a top 5 middleweight, so I give Daniel Gil a B. Gennadi's next appearance in the ring would be on October 18th, 2014, where he would fight the number 14th ranked middleweight in the world, 59-6 veteran Marco Antonio Rubio. This was another stay busy fight for Golovkin while all the big names ducked him, and it was perfect because he was getting in rounds while waiting for the other guys to step up. Andrade and Charlo could learn a thing or two from this guy. Well, let's get to the fight. In the first round, Gennadi was catching Rubio with jabs and left hooks, and near the end of the round, Triple G would land a big right hand on Rubio. With less than a minute into round 2, they would get on the inside, where G would land a vicious right uppercut on Rubio. G smelled blood and went in for the kill, and this would be the first time we would see his now infamous punch, the corkscrew. Rubio would try to beat the count, but he couldn't do it, and Triple G had secured himself a second round knockout against Marco Antonio Rubio, successfully defending his WBA Super Middleweight title for the 12th time. I would give Rubio a C, but in Golovkin's next fight, he would fight his best opponent yet by far. Before we get into Golovkin's 13th title defense, let's take a deep dive at the guys he's fought so far. So I tried to get the ranking of every guy he defended his title against, but I wasn't able to get the rankings of the first 3. But from his 4th defense on, these were the rankings of the guys he fought in the middleweight division. I'll be showing quite a few statistics, so pause the video if you'd like. The number that stuck out most to me was the average ranking of his opponents, which is 14, which definitely isn't bad. Having your average opponent ranking be in the top 15 when you're being ducked religiously is pretty good, but we will do our second recap when he reaches 20 title defenses. But with that out of the way, let's get on to title defense number 13. Golovkin's next fight would be against the number 9 ranked middleweight in the world, 29-1-1 Martin Murray. Even though Martin Murray is ranked lower, I believe he was much better than Gil and Macklin. Murray was 32 years old in this fight, so pretty much in the prime of his career, and he had had 2 previous big fights before this. The first big fight was in 2011, where he fought 36-2-1 Felix Sturm for the WBA belt. And Sturm, who we've mentioned before, is a good fighter. It sucks that he ducked Golovkin so long, but I mean, health first, right? But anyway, during the fight, Murray was beating Sturm with body shots and this double left hook combination he kept landing on Sturm over and over. But Murray would soon find out that you can't go 12 rounds with Felix Sturm in his home turf and win. So after winning 7 or 8 rounds against Sturm, the fight was announced a draw. So Martin Murray was robbed of his opportunity to win a middleweight belt. But he would end up getting another title shot 2 years later when he fought 52-2 Sergio Martinez for the WBC belt. Martin would once again do very well in this fight, but once again he would be in the enemy's turf, and this fight probably has to be one of the most unfair one-sided fights I've ever seen. Murray landed a clean body punch, and Sergio faked it was a low blow and got time to recover from the ref. When they tried to show a replay of the punch, the screen goes blue so the people in the audience wouldn't see he actually faked it. The crowd was extremely one-sided, and in round 8, Murray would knock Martinez down with a clean right, and listen to how quiet the crowd got. Martinez would get up, and the fight began to slowly shift into Martin Murray's favor, and at the end of 12 rounds, you could have had it anywhere from 115 to 112 for Martin Murray, or maybe if you're generous, 114 to 113 for Martinez, but Martin Murray definitely had the edge.
The winner, the Quilmes Argentina.
But of course, being in Argentina, all three judges gave it to Martinez, 115-112. Martinez acted like he was champ afterwards because he barely retained his belt and while at the same time was ducking Golovkin. What an absolute coward. But now you know what kind of fighter Martin Murray is and how he should have been champ twice. But anyways, on to the fight with Golovkin. On February 1st, 2015, 32-year-old Gennady Golovkin would make the 13th defense of his WBA belt against the number 9 ranked middleweight in the world, 29-1-1 Martin Murray. The first punch landed in the fight was a straight right hand to the body by Murray, who was known to be a good body puncher. Early on, Martin was showing a great guard and not getting hit with any jabs by Golovkin. Well, for the first 2 minutes of round 1 at least. Going into the third, Golovkin was dictating the pace and action. Murray was showing good defense compared to other Golovkin opponents, but he was still getting hit and being pushed back. Murray was hit with bombs by Golovkin and asked, "Is that all?" Golovkin proceeded to land a killer left hook through the guard that shut Murray up. With 10 seconds left in the third, Triple G would land a great straight right hand that hurts Murray. He then follows up with other big shots, but Murray would survive the round. In round 4, Murray had the most success he had in the fight so far. Still losing and only landing small jabs, but he was doing better. But Triple G was doing a brilliant job cutting off the ring, and I want to say probably 80% of this entire fight Murray was on the ropes. With a minute left in the fourth, Gennady cracked Murray with a devastating right hook right on the solar plexus that knocked Murray down.
Here is go back.
The knockdown was a delayed reaction, so Murray went down because of how painful the shot was. Murray would later say in an interview that the body shot hurt so bad it made him feel like he was having a baby. But Murray got up, and when asked by the referee if he wanted to continue, Murray said yes. But as soon as the ref moved out of the way, Golovkin ran after Martin, looking for the kill, and he would soon get Murray on the ropes and land another great body shot. Murray took a knee, but I feel this one was more of just trying to get his breath back from the previous shot. Murray would get up and end up surviving the rest of the round.
And that might just have helped Murray.
At the beginning of the fifth, Golovkin would run towards Murray to begin his destruction on the ropes. But Murray was a tough customer and showed tremendous defense against Golovkin. Murray rarely got hit with jabs and straights, which is Golovkin's specialty. Murray had a very good guard as mentioned previously, but that's bad news for him because Golovkin knows exactly how to get past a fighter's guard. And there's no explanation for this really. Gennady has always landed this same right hook behind the guard against opponents, and I actually have no clue how because I've never seen anyone have such a good way of breaking someone's guard before. But the way he was setting up punches was masterful. He threw a corkscrew punch as we previously mentioned, followed by another one to set up an uppercut. After that brutal uppercut, Golovkin would land more and more power punches in the 8th, and Murray hit the deck. It wasn't a clean knockdown and it was technically a slip, but I definitely think Murray fell down on purpose to get a break. Some people were shocked to see Murray in here for so long because Golovkin hadn't had an opponent go past 9 rounds since Kasim Uma 5 years prior, and people were also shocked to see Golovkin getting hit with hard punches all of a sudden. And honestly, I think at this point in the fight, G didn't care if he got hit or not, and he just came in to land his own shots. But Murray was landing a lot in rounds 9 and 10, but after his best combination in round 10, I think G started trying again and landed 2 devastating right hands through the guard. With 10 seconds left in the 10th, Golovkin would land a perfect right hand on Murray that sent him down. Murray would get up, but luckily he didn't need to worry about surviving because the round was already over. Less than a minute into round 11, Triple G would land 2 vicious right hands that would prompt the referee to stop the fight. Gennady Triple G Golovkin would defeat Martin Murray by 11th round technical knockout and successfully defend his WBA belt for the 13th time. Murray was in his prime, robbed of being a champion twice, and proved he's a tough guy, so I'd give Martin Murray a B. On May 16, 2015, Gennady Golovkin would make the 14th defense of his WBA Super World Middleweight title against the number 17th ranked middleweight in the world, 19-1 slick southpaw boxer Willie Monroe Jr. Monroe, in his last fight, had beat Brian Vera, a decent fighter who knocked out Andy Lee and beat Sergio Mora twice. And Monroe Jr. would be the first southpaw Golovkin would fight since his HBO debut against Proxa in 2012, so it would be interesting to see how Golovkin would do against a high-level southpaw. Not a lot happened in round 1. Monroe was trying to shoe shine, and Triple G was cutting off the ring. But in round 2, Triple G would start to put more pressure on Monroe, and backed him into a corner where he would land an absolute peach of a left hook. This is one of my all-time favorite Golovkin moments, because he landed the left hook right in front of the corner camera, and you see all the sweat and Vaseline fly off Monroe's face when he lands it. Monroe would get up, and when he got up, G would once again show his killer instinct. Gennady would knock him down again 30 seconds later, but no real clean punch landed, so it seemed more like a slip to me because Golovkin was literally running towards him. There was 30 seconds left in the round, and Golovkin would land some hard punches, but Monroe showed heart by throwing back and surviving the last 30 seconds. In round 3, Golovkin would show tremendous accuracy. When fighting a southpaw, it's hard to land your jab because of their stance. You'd think they make Golovkin struggle because it takes away his biggest weapon. But G would still manage to get the jab through and land straight rights and left hooks without even setting them up. After dominating the first 3, in round 4, Golovkin decided to play with his food a bit and give the fans a show. Gennady put his gloves down and literally let Monroe Jr. hit him as hard as he could on the face.
Monroe throwing punches, do a jab and follow with a beautiful straight left hand, probably one of the hardest shots we've seen Golovkin get hit with, and Golovkin just looked at him and said, yes, good punch, come on.
The gesture that Golovkin made after being hit with those shots has to be one of the most terrifying things I've ever seen. I mean, if I was Monroe Jr., I would have just quit right then and there. People said he was hit like that because he gets lazy after using control of a fight, but that wasn't the case at all. Monroe Jr. only had 6 KOs of his 19 wins, and Gennady knew what he was doing. At the beginning of round 5, G had enough fooling around and 10 seconds in landed a brutal left uppercut that hurt Monroe Jr. Golovkin would soon land a huge left hook that put Monroe Jr. on wobbly legs. Even though Monroe would stay up after that punch, Golovkin was once again dominating him, landing punches at will and cutting off the ring masterfully. And in his mind, he knew he could end the fight at any time. And only 10 seconds into round 6, Gennady would decide that it was time.
169. Golovkin took over the punch count leadership in the last round. Again.
Hurt him with
Great
a right
uppercut.
Right uppercut hurt him really
Great
bad,
uppercut.
Jim.
He's wobbled Monroe again.
Yeah, right
He's got him against the ropes.
Oh, right uppercut hurt him really bad, and the hook just hurt him even worse. He's out of here.
Triple G would land a bunch of power shots on Monroe that made Monroe Jr. take a knee. Monroe Jr. waited to the very last second to get up.
8, 9, 10. You just beat it. You just beat it. You got to move faster.
He
You
should
want to
stop it,
continue?
Jim. His legs are
You
gone.
want to continue?
His legs are gone. Yes. Thank you.
Monroe Jr. told Jack Reese he didn't want to continue, and Jack would stop the fight. It would be a 6-round technical knockout for Gennady Triple G Golovkin. He had successfully defended his WBA Super World Middleweight title for the 14th time. But the question was, where are the other belt holders? 4 days after the Monroe Jr. fight, my good friend Michael Montero made a video explaining why Golovkin's fighting guys like Willie Monroe Jr.
One of the first criticisms I wanted to address is when people say Golovkin hasn't fought anybody. He's not fighting the top middleweights. My question to you is, who do you want him to fight? Let's look at the middleweight rankings right now. Miguel Cotto. No, he's not really jumping at the chance to fight Golovkin, and he has a fight coming up against Gil. Peter Quillen. He's an Al Haymon fighter, so that ain't happening. Andy Lee. That is a possibility, and K2 Promotions has talked about it. Jermaine Taylor, he went batshit, he's in jail right now. Danny Jacobs, Al Haymon fighter / indentured servant. Daniel Gill, already knocked him the fuck out, he's fighting Cotto. Sam Solomon, no. George Sebastian Highland, no. Hassam Nadam, he's fighting David Lemieux for a vacant title that the whack shit Jermaine Taylor used to have. The winner of that fight, maybe Golovkin can go at them. I don't think Lemieux would want to fight Golovkin, but Nadam, he will fight anybody. So if he ends up winning that fight, maybe we can see that one. Chris Eubank Jr., not ready. Martin Murray, already beat him. Marco Antonio Rubio, already beat him. You see where I'm going with this, guys?
So, Mike nailed it here, and if you like content similar to mine, I think you'll like his channel as well. Link is in the description. But Michael mentioned that David Lemieux and Hassan Nadam were fighting for the vacant IBF belt, and that's what Golovkin was looking for. Only a month after the Monroe Jr. fight, 2 of the top 10 middleweights in the world would fight for the vacant IBF belt. 33-2 David Lemieux and 31-1 Hassan Nadam. But before we go into this fight, let's take a look at each fighter's most notable wins and highlights because, spoiler alert, Golovkin will be fighting the winner. Let's start with Hassan Nadam. Nadam was 31-1 with 18 knockouts. He punched very hard and had fought 2 recognizable names going into this fight. In 2012, he lost a unanimous decision against 27-0 Peter Quillen while putting up a tough fight. Then fighting Curtis Stevens the fight before Lemieux, where he ended up decisioning Stevens and even ended up knocking him down. And Dom was a good boxer with power and always came to fight. David Lemieux was 33-2 with 31 knockouts, and he had 27 knockouts in 3 rounds or less. Even to this day, I still say that David Lemieux is in the top 5 hardest punchers in boxing. To be honest, he's knocked more fighters out cold than any other fighter I can recall seeing. Whenever he lands flush, you're going to sleep. The blueprint to beat Lemieux sounds pretty easy, just don't get hit. He's not the best boxer, and if you can avoid the punches, you'll be fine. But if he hits you flush once, it could easily be over because of how devastating his power is. His fight before in Dom was against a previous Golovkin opponent, Gabriel Rosado. If you recall the fight, Rosado stayed on his feet the whole time against Golovkin and put up a good performance before Golovkin laid on too much punishment. But Rosado's very tough, so he never went down. Against Lemieux, he went down once in round 3, and then got stopped in round 10 afterwards. But still, if you can at least stop Rosado, you can definitely crack, which Lemieux can. So now you know the info on each guy, so let's get back into the fight. Dom was boxing Lemieux well and winning rounds, but Lemieux's power would save the day and he would score 4 knockdowns. 1 knockdown in the 2nd, 2 knockdowns in the 5th, and 1 knockdown in the 7th, all with the left hook. And by the way Dom went down after every punch, you would have thought he died. But it was a close fight, probably 7-5 for Lemieux, but he had 4 extra points because of the knockdowns, and he would win the fight by unanimous decision. So I think you know what's next. In July, a month after David Lemieux won the IBF strap against Hassan Nadam, The fight against Golovkin would be announced for October 17th. This would be a very important fight for Golovkin. Because he was massively ducked, G hadn't fought another belt holder in his 14 title defenses. He had the WBA regular belt, which was soon upgraded to the WBA super belt after he made 10 title defenses of the regular belt. But we'll discuss all that belt nonsense sometime later. So this fight would be a real unification bout between the WBA champ and the IBF champ. Golovkin was the #1 ranked middleweight in the world, and Lemieux was the #5. Not only that, this was a fight between two of the hardest punchers in boxing, so people were expecting a war. The fight would take place in Madison Square Garden and be on HBO pay-per-view. It would be the first pay-per-view of Golovkin's career. The fight would gain a lot of traction, and it would actually set a record at MSG for most tickets sold in a pre-sale, and 10,000 tickets would be sold the first day it went on sale, and soon the venue would be sold out. On October 17th, 2015, WBA belt holder Gennady Triple G Golovkin would have a unification bout against IBF belt holder David Lemieux. There was 20,548 in attendance, and it sold 150,000 pay-per-view buys on HBO. Gennady Golovkin was 33-0 with 30 knockouts. He came in with 20 straight knockouts in a row and had all knockouts in his 14 previous title defenses. He was 33.5 years old. David Lemieux was 34-2 with 31 knockouts, and he was 2 months shy of his 27th birthday. But with the introductions out of the way, let's get to the fight. When the bell rung, both men would meet in the middle of the ring. Lemieux would throw a 1-2 that Golovkin leaned away from, and then Gennady started throwing his jab. Lemieux is a very strong guy physically and a devastating puncher, so Triple G wasn't stalking him or cutting the ring off on him like he does with most opponents. He was just in the middle of the ring, staying cautious while using his jab to keep the distance. Speaking of the jab, Gennady would throw 30 jabs before he throws his first power punch, and yes, I counted. The few times Lemieux came in to punch, Golovkin would snap his head back with the jab. With a minute left, Triple G would throw a counter right hand on Lemieux that sent Lemieux back towards the ropes. Triple G would follow up with a left hook to the body and would jab Lemieux again to keep him away. Golovkin would then land a nice 1-2 combo on Lemieux, backing him up, and then it was once again back to the jab. Round 1 was a brilliant round for Golovkin. He showed great boxing ability and great defense.
Shot for Lemieux, but all in all, a Gennady Golovkin round dominated by his jab.
Golovkin would start round 2 off once again, meeting Lemieux in the center of the ring. He threw a jab, followed by a left hook, and landed both of them. Golovkin would then follow up, throwing a bunch of shots and landing 3 flush jabs on Lemieux, snapping his head back every time. Lemieux would then have a bull rush, where he came and threw bombs, but Golovkin would snap his head back with a jab that stopped Lemieux in his tracks. Lemieux would then land his first punch of the fight, a jab that moved Golovkin's head back a little. But for every punch that Lemieux landed, Golovkin would land 20. Probably every 10 seconds, Lemieux would get his head snapped back by a jab. Golovkin's determination, accuracy, and IQ was absolutely brilliant. Another great thing I noticed Golovkin doing was rolling his shoulder to deflect the straight rights from Lemieux. He was doing a terrific job at this, not getting hit once. He also was doing a great job at parrying Lemieux's jabs. With around 30 seconds left in round 2, he would catch Lemieux with a left hook right on the solar plexus that hurt Lemieux. Golovkin would then follow up.
Left hook for Golovkin. Right hand lands again. Phenomenal accuracy. Unbelievable accuracy early on for the Kazakh star.
G would finish round 2 strong, landing a clean 1-2 combination with the right hand snapping Lemieux's head back. But Lemieux was a very tough guy, so he withstood it. But being tough doesn't help you against Golovkin. Round 2 was another masterclass. Every time I watch this fight, the more impressed I am with Golovkin's performance and the use of his jab. I know you may be thinking, it's just a jab, why is he talking about his jab so much? But the jab is the most important punch in boxing. It helps set up punches, keep you busy, keep the opponent off, and like 300 other things. And I've said it before, I've never seen a fighter in history have a better jab than Gennady Golovkin. Larry Holmes, Winky Wright, Floyd Mayweather, Vladimir Klitschko, and a few others come to mind when thinking of great jabs. But no one's is as powerful, accurate, and as punishing as Golovkin's. It's an extremely helpful tool he has in his arsenal, and you'll see later on when he fights better opposition how important it is. For him, it stuns and hurts guys, marks their face up, is a scoring punch, and most importantly, he always lands it. But he really does land against everybody. I remember seeing a sparring session where he sparred Tony Harrison, a good defensive fighter who beat Jermell Charlo, and he couldn't move away from it at all. There was so many jabs landed in this fight that I could go on forever, but enough of the rambling, let's get back into the action. Golovkin would of course dominate the round with his jab, and he would land 23 jabs that would snap Lemieux's head back. Going into the fourth, Golovkin had dominated Lemieux for 3 rounds. Lemieux is used to losing fights because he relies on his power, but this was absolute domination. Golovkin probably landed 100 punches at this point, while Lemieux hadn't even landed 10. Lemieux just couldn't come in to land punches because Golovkin's jab was so strong. Gennady could do this all night and win a decision if he wanted to, but he started to set up power punches in round 4. He caught Lemieux with a perfect left hook, and at the same time he would use his right glove to protect his face from Lemieux's left hook.
Land until they get hit.
You see the skills of Triple G. He throws a beautiful left hook while blocking a beautiful left hook at the same time. Lemieux threw his without defense, but Triple G threw his with absolute marvelous defense.
Lemieux was hurt, he backed up, and Golovkin would throw 2 stiff jabs and a hard right hand with all 3 of them landing. He then started to use his jab well again, and used it to snap Lemieux's head back and make him move and stumble all across the ring. He'd move him to the ropes and unleash vicious punches, but Lemieux stood up to them, but it wasn't a good look. After Lemieux survived the combo, Golovkin would go back to the jab and snapping Lemieux's head back in the middle of the ring. It was one of the best performances in boxing in recent memory. But still, Lemieux could land a bomb and end the fight at any moment. And after 4.5 rounds of being obliterated, the battered and bewildered Lemieux would land a hard, clean right cross on the ear of Golovkin. This would give Lemieux hope, and he would try to follow up, but Gennady didn't take this too kindly. He began to abuse Lemieux and make him wish he was never born. I don't think Golovkin likes Lemieux very much because he usually doesn't care when he gets hit. Golovkin would soon land a fight-ending shot right to the liver, and as you can see in the replays, he used the sharp part of his thumb to stick it in Lemieux's ribs, so I can't imagine how bad that had to hurt. So Lemieux went down, and on his way down, Golovkin hit him with a right hand. This definitely wasn't intentional, and it was more of an instinct, but let's pause right here. There's a lot going on in this moment. If you look at Golovkin's face, you can see he was in the zone. When referee Steve Willis came over to stop him, Golovkin's face was this cold, mean stare for a second, before he changed his facial expression and realized what was going on. Lemieux was a warrior, so he didn't fake anything and would get up, so there is no need for a point deduction or disqualification. But this was bad for Lemieux because Golovkin was going to go after him as soon as he got up. But there was only 5 seconds left of the round.
2 seconds left in the round.
Golovkin would also hit Lemieux after the bell, but I think this was also due to instinct. The doctors would check up on Lemieux before round 6 to make sure he was okay to continue, and he was. Now, a lot of people think this is the perfect time for Lemieux to catch Golovkin, because Golovkin sometimes gets careless after taking control of a fight. And this would actually be proven because Lemieux landed his perfect left hook less than a minute into round 6, but Golovkin wasn't bothered at all. Like I said, Lemieux can hurt anyone, but I don't think anyone can hurt Triple G. Lemieux would land a few other big punches in the round, but the thing is, Golovkin was also starting to land really big punches, and not just the jab. Even the jabs in this round were hitting really hard. Some of the jabs made Lemieux's whole body move back. In Lemieux's mind, you knew he definitely felt he had a chance because of how confident he is in his power, similar to the mindset of Deontay Wilder. But this was starting to get really bad, and we were only halfway through.
Good up. And a right hand uppercut to punctuate the round.
Some hard on Lemieux.
20 seconds into round 7, Triple G would land his best jab of the fight that broke Lemieux's nose. If you're wondering how I know this, it's because right after being hit with this jab, Lemieux did a little scratch at his nose, and blood began to pour from it. Golovkin would begin to break Lemieux's nose even more with the jab, and referee Steve Willis was making faces towards Lemieux, implying that if he didn't start fighting back, he would stop the fight. Golovkin would snap Lemieux's head back again with the jab, making more blood flow, and the referee decided to call time so the doctor could inspect Lemieux's nose. Lemieux would show that warrior mentality because while getting his nose checked out, he would say the entire time, I'm okay. But the referee did decide it was okay for Lemieux to continue, so the fight started back up again. But around this time, I personally think the fight should have been stopped. Lemieux was missing every single punch he threw, and Golovkin was snapping his head back at will. With a minute left in the round, Golovkin would land a big right hand on Lemieux that sent him into the corner. Steve Willis was really close to stopping it here, but he didn't, and the punishment would continue. Golovkin would start bringing the body work in again, and it was truly brutal. Lemieux would make it out of round 7, but you could tell that the end was near.
He can't get away from the jab.
He's gonna fight it.
Golovkin would start to jab Lemieux's head off for the first minute of round 8. Then, when he started letting his body punches go, it was finished.
He's fought.
Exactly. Good right hand.
Hard left hook. Hammered Lemieux. Good right hand by Lemieux, but the uppercut by Golovkin drives him back into the ropes. The body shot hurt him again. Steve Willis is going to stop the fight. Technical knockout for Golovkin in the 8th.
Gennady Golovkin would make the 15th title defense of his WBA belt, and now add the IBF belt to his collection after beating number 5 ranked middleweight David Lemieux by 8th round knockout. Lemieux was a hard-hitting champion in his prime, so I give him a B+. So, it was October of 2015, and Gennady Golovkin had just beat David Lemieux and added the IBF belt to his collection. Now, what's next for Triple G? Well, Max Kellerman would ask the main man himself that question right after the brilliant win he had over Lemieux.
Okay, you got another middleweight strap. What do you want next?
My goal is all the belts in middleweight division. I want bring new story. You remember long time ago, big day for middleweight division. My goal is all the belts. I'm staying here. Look, I have 4 belts. Who next? It doesn't matter for me. I want bring my fans big event.
So the winner of Cotto and Canelo, I suppose, would be the next logical step.
Both 2 great champions. I want meet with who win.
So there's a few things to take away from this. You may be wondering, why the hell does he have 4 belts? I thought you said he had 2. Well, only 2 of those are considered actual world titles, the WBA and IBF. And the other belts he had, the IBO and the interim WBC, were not considered main world titles. The other 2 main belts were the WBC and the WBO. And as Max Kellerman mentioned, the WBC belt would be on the line in the fight between Canelo and Cotto only 1 month after this one. And Golovkin said he was interested in fighting the winner of that fight. Cotto was the WBC champion, and as much as I love him, and he's an absolute legend and a great guy, but he clearly avoided Golovkin. If you don't know who Miguel Cotto is, he's a warrior who fought everybody. He fought Canelo, Austin Trout, Floyd Mayweather Jr., Manny Pacquiao, and Shane Mosley, just to name a few. But Cotto wanted nothing to do with Golovkin.
Gennady Golovkin is sitting here ringside, and you just fought a guy who he knocked out recently. Do you have interest in that fight?
Okay, all jokes aside though, Cotto's team paid Golovkin off not to fight. So if Cotto lost this fight with Canelo, he would lose his belt and Canelo would become the belt holder. and maybe Canelo would be the man to step up and Golovkin could get another belt. The weird thing about Cotto's middleweight belt, though, is that he never fought at 160. He either fought at 154 or 155 catchweight, which is so weird because if anything, that should be for the super welterweight belt. But besides all that, this would be a fun fight between two great fighters. Cotto was 40-4 and 34 years old. He was a very experienced fighter who had wins over Sergio Martinez, Antonio Margarito, Shane Mosley, and a couple others. His only losses were to Austin Trout, Floyd Mayweather, and Manny Pacquiao, a great fighter and two certified Hall of Famers. Canelo was 45-1-1 and 25 years old. His notable wins were against Erislandy Lara and previously mentioned Austin Trout, who beat Miguel Cotto. And his only loss was 2 years prior when he fought Mayweather at 22 years old, when he was extremely green and not ready. But we will go super in-depth about Canelo later on. Trust me. Both of these guys were A-level fighters, and I would rank them a level above guys like Lemieux, Martin Murray, and Daniel Geale. Cotto had one of the best left hands in the sport behind Triple G. He had a devastating left hook to the body and head, and had a great jab. He had a ton of experience and a great ring IQ, and he had a lot of tools in his arsenal. Canelo has some of the best defense in the sport and probably has the best head movement. He's one of the best counter punchers in the sport and a devastating body puncher. He also has an A-level chin and a fantastic ring IQ. And because he was so young, he seemed to be getting better and better every single time he entered the ring. Canelo already had a big following, so if he beat Cotto, he would become an even bigger superstar than he already was. And those skills of Canelo I just mentioned would be apparent the longer the fight went on. He was landing great counter punches, great body punches, and was doing a great job avoiding punches. Starting around 8, Canelo really started to dominate Cotto, landing flush power punches at will and eating anything Cotto threw back in return. And Canelo was a big puncher, so being hit with his punches is bad news. But like I said, Cotto was a veteran, so he didn't go down. Cotto landed some good jabs, but past the halfway point, it really wasn't competitive. And I feel like I've done enough analysis on this fight, so I'll get to the point. Canelo would win a unanimous decision in a 9-3, 8-4 type of fight. So we know that Golovkin wanted Canelo. But did Canelo want Golovkin?
Okay, now we turn our attention to what's coming up. The hope in the boxing world was that if Canelo won, he would fight Triple G because Canelo fights everyone. What are your thoughts now that you're considered the lineal middleweight champion and he has all the belts, or many of the belts? What are your thoughts about fighting Triple G?
I respect, he's a great champion. I know him, he's a friend of mine, but right now I'll put the gloves on against him.
And this is one of the many reasons the boxing world loves Canelo. Congratulations, champ.
Gracias. Esta era, la era del Canelo es la mejor. Gracias.
So, was this Canelo being serious, or was he capping? Well, behind the scenes, Team Alvarez and Golden Boy supposedly wanted one more fight before they stepped in with Golovkin. So it seemed that in September of 2016, a super fight between Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin would take place. And this fight needed to happen sooner than later because Golovkin was already 33 and a half. But who's next for each guy? Gennady's next fight would be on April 23rd, 2016, 6 months after his last fight and 5 months after Canelo Cotto. On April 23, 2016, Gennady Golovkin would make the 16th defense of his WBA belt and the first defense of his IBF belt against his IBF mandatory, the number 12 ranked middleweight in the world, 18-0 Dominic Wade. In his last fight, Wade had beaten Sam Solomon, which made him the mandatory, and the IBF is extremely harsh with mandatories and strip guys fairly quickly if they don't fight their mandos. So Golovkin decided to get Wade out of the way while he waits for the super fight against Canelo in September. With 13 seconds to go in the first round, Golovkin would land a great right hand right behind the ear on Wade that knocked him down. At first, I thought it was a rabbit punch, but in the replays it showed it was clean. Wade looked mentally destroyed after this knockdown and looked like he didn't want to continue. But he did, and luckily for him, the round was over. Golovkin would toy with this dude. After knocking him down, he had his fun and would do the Willie Monroe Jr. thing, where he would put his gloves down and let his opponent hit him. Then, when Wade hit G with everything he had, Golovkin would hit him with this Ben Shapiro-like smirk.
And now Gennady seems to go into that thing, Roy, where this is yeah, he kind of lets the guy hit him a little bit.
Show him that he can't hurt him, they disregard anything to do.
After letting Wade get some confidence, Triple G would take it all away and do something I've never seen before. He would knock him down with a shoulder punch. And yes, the left uppercut set it up, but the fact he hit him on the shoulder to push him down, just wow. Wade would get up, but Golovkin had already decided that he wanted to go home early. Gennady would hit him with a beautiful overhand right, and Wade would not be getting up this time. Gennady Golovkin had successfully made the 16th defense of his WBA belt and secured a second-round knockout over Dominic Wade. So where was Canelo? Canelo would fight Amir Khan 2 weeks later, and our main man G would be at ringside. Canelo would get a fantastic knockout against Khan, but the win wasn't that impressive since Amir Khan was so much smaller and known for having the worst chin in boxing history. But Canelo got the job done, so it looks like this fight was next. Canelo would finally be the first elite guy to step up and fight a prime Golovkin. Right?
He said, no, I don't want to fight with you, just take my belt.
So, yes, Canelo vacated his WBC belt not to fight Golovkin, but I personally feel this was a move by Golden Boy and not Canelo. If you weren't aware, David Lemieux was a Golden Boy fighter and Triple G absolutely obliterated him in front of Oscar and Bernard Hopkins' eyes less than a year ago. And because Canelo was their biggest star, they didn't want him to lose, so they made him vacate so he wouldn't have to fight Golovkin. So, Golovkin now had the IBF, WBA, and WBC, and he would need one more belt to become undisputed, the WBO. But who had it? Well, Andy Lee had it. And 2 months after Golovkin's fight against Lemieux, and 1 month after Canelo and Cotto, WBO belt holder Andy Lee would lose his belt to Billy Joe Saunders in a 12-round majority decision. So this fight could definitely happen, right? Well, when Billy Joe Saunders fought Eubank Jr. 1 year before in 2014, this is what Billy Joe would say about a fight with Golovkin in a pre-fight press conference.
You said that you beat Foreman. Your dad said you beat Golovkin. Golovkin would destroy me and you on the same night. How about that? Golovkin would destroy me and you on the same night. How about that?
So, yeah, Billy Joe Saunders wasn't really interested in getting battered by Golovkin, but Eubank Jr. would show interest in this fight 2 years later in 2016. He was the number 5 ranked middleweight in the world, and even though he lost a close fight to Billy Joe Saunders a year prior, he would slowly bring himself back up, and after a 4th-round knockout of Tom Duran in June of 2016, Eubank Jr. would call Golovkin out in his post-fight interview.
Gennady Golovkin, man, I'm coming for you. I'm coming for your belts, man. Everyone's scared of you. For some reason, people think you're the indestructible man. You're not, and I'm coming.
Only 5 days after Eubank's fight, the fight would start getting closer to being signed, but Eddie Hearn was saying how difficult it was to communicate with the Eubank team, and they didn't seem too eager to step in with Golovkin. And then, Eubank Jr. would then go on to infamously lose his pen to sign the contract. There's even Twitter accounts dedicated to him dropping his pen. Shout out to my boy. So, it turns out Eubank Jr. never really wanted to fight Golovkin, and the fight wouldn't happen. And it would suck because no one else wanted to step up. But one fighter would step up to the plate, and it was a surprise who it was. It would be the IBF welterweight champion of the world, 36-0 Kell Brook. If you don't know the difference between welterweight and middleweight, they are 2 weight classes apart and a 13-pound difference in weight. So there would be a size difference. but Kell Brook was the real deal. He was rated as the 3rd best middleweight in the world, but he was most likely the best. He already had 3 defenses, and he won his IBF belt against a prime 24-0 Showtime Shawn Porter in August of 2014. If you don't know who Shawn Porter is, well, he's a monster to say the least. He's a killer inside the ring. He doesn't have a lot of punching power, but he's extremely physically strong and has a very big frame for a welterweight. If you just want to know how big he is, well, he would beat Alexander Usyk in the amateurs. That's right, a heavyweight in the amateurs, and he was only 5'7". He had a great amateur career too, beating Demetrius Andrade and Willie Monroe, but that's not the point. In the pros, Brook would beat Shawn Porter convincingly in a 9-3, 8-4 type of fight. This is actually one of my all-time favorite boxing matches because Brook shows absolutely amazing boxing skill. He was using the jab to keep Shawn Porter off from going on the inside, which is Shawn's specialty. He then showed beautiful defense and fantastic counters against Porter. Like, if you want an example of the sweet science, watch Kell Brook versus Shawn Porter. You'll be amazed at how relaxed Kell Brook was and how much he kept his composure when a man was going after him. And after this fight, people would see how good Brook was because Shawn Porter would end up beating Danny Garcia and Yordenis Ugas and losing extremely close fights with a prime Keith Thurman and a prime Errol Spence Jr. And most people felt he beat Spence, and he won 5 rounds against Keith Thurman. Porter had an A-level chin, good boxing skills, the physical strength of a welterweight Beterbiev, experience, and a heart of gold. And Brook would beat him pretty easily. But let's get back to G. So after Brook beat Porter, he would make 3 defenses of his belt. And the fight with Golovkin would be made only 1 week after the Eubank negotiations fell off. The fight was set to take place on September 10th, 2016, in Brook's backyard in the O2 Arena. On September 10th, 2016, Gennady Golovkin would make the 17th defense of his title reign when he fought 36-0, number 3 ranked welterweight in the world, Kell Brook. Even though Brook was a welterweight, he's arguably the naturally bigger guy, because during their 30-day weigh-in exercise on August 11th, Kell Brook would weigh a whopping 176 pounds to Golovkin's modest 165 pounds. But size doesn't matter when you're fighting a man like Golovkin, who's simply built different. He would catch Brook with a devastating liver shot only a minute and a half into round 1 that hurt Kell Brook. And it just goes to show you that with Golovkin, one mistake could end it all, because all the good work Brook did up to this point was thrown in the trash. But Golovkin would get a little careless after this and thought he could bully Brook around because he was the bigger guy. He didn't use his jab as much and just let Brook hit him while he tried to land a bomb. But Brook was a great fighter, so he was staying away from Golovkin and managed to get in some really big punches on Gennady. He landed a great uppercut on Golovkin, and the English fans loved this. If you look at the crowd, everyone jumps out of their seats and goes crazy because of this one punch Brook landed. And even though Brook was hurt in the beginning, he did a really good job in coming back and probably won round 1 against Golovkin. Golovkin wasn't bothered at all though, and he probably viewed this as a game of basketball, where Brook was the younger sister and he was the older brother who was letting her get some layups in. Gennady would start round 2 strong, using his jab and snapping Brook's head back. But after that 10 seconds, Brook was starting to control the pace. He was landing some great jabs to keep Gennady off, and was landing some nice punches through Golovkin's guard. And Golovkin wasn't even landing his jab that much either. Then with a minute left in the second, Kell Brook would hit Golovkin with the hardest punch he'd been hit with as a professional to that point.
A wild punch, he's waiting to counter. He's a better counter puncher when Triple G is coming in.
Uppercut by Brook. Crowd comes out of its seats, excited by the uppercut. Brook getting in some heavy shots here in round number 2.
Brook landed a picture-perfect uppercut on Golovkin that made the British fans go wild. Golovkin probably figured out here that Brook wasn't just some blown-up welterweight and was actually the most skilled guy he's fought as a pro to this point. So he decided that he'd actually try now, and when he started to try and not just bully Brook, Golovkin started to really beat Brook up. At the beginning of round 3, Brook would fall down from being off balance. Wasn't a punch, but it probably made Kell feel a bit uneasy. Golovkin started to go to work with his jab, landing it at will. But after a few good jabs, Kell Brook began to scratch at or paw at his right eye like something was wrong with it. You'd think something was wrong, but then after a dominant first half by Gennady, Kell Brook would land a very clean right-hand counter followed by another few shots that kept him in the fight. But after that, it was back to the jab for Golovkin, and Triple G took round 3. I mentioned earlier that Brook was pawing at his right eye, and when he went out for round 4, you could see why he was doing that. His eye looked badly bruised and swollen, but he decided to keep on fighting. Round 4 would be very similar to round 3. Kell Brook would land a few good punches, but Triple G was dominating the action with his jab and his ring generalship.
And he's getting hit spot on.
In the previous rounds, there wasn't a lot of audio in Kell Brook's corner, so you didn't know what was going on. But in the corner between rounds 4 and 5, Dominic Ingle can be heard saying, "If I don't see Kell Brook, that's it. You gotta be there. You're still there." So basically referring to if he gets hit too much and doesn't punch back, Dominic's gonna stop it. It seemed odd though, because Kell Brook definitely wasn't being dominated. He was still having success. But in round 5, he would get dominated. He wouldn't be throwing back too much, and Golovkin was landing jabs and power punches at will. He would be pawing at his eye again, then Triple G would land flush jabs right on his right eye. Triple G would land a flush straight right hand on Kell's face. That would be the beginning of the end.
Body shots again, as he did in round number 1.
And yes, he is. He's pop shotting right now, as you see him straight right.
And Dominic Ingle in the far corner is holding up a towel. Ingle is trying to get referee Marlon Wright to stop the fight, and now he finally throws the towel into the ring, and Gennady Golovkin is going to have a technical knockout victory in round number 5.
So let's look at what happened. I gave hints about it, but if you couldn't tell, this fight was stopped because Kell Brook had fractured his orbital bone, a very serious career-ending injury. And his trainer, Dominic Ingle, showed a lot of love for his fighter because Kell Brook wasn't getting wobbled or hurt with any punches, but he knew that Kell Brook was probably seeing double vision out of his right eye, which turned out to be the case. The sad thing is, though, is that it was too late. Kell Brook wouldn't be the same fighter after this. He tried going back down to win another belt at 147 with Errol Spence, and he was winning rounds doing very good before his other eye socket was fractured. It really sucks though, because if Brook never made the mistake of fighting Golovkin, I think he could have very likely been a Hall of Famer or possibly even more, but this fight ruined it all for him. But we're not going to leave it on a sad note. My man Kell got a very nice payday from all this, and in my opinion, although it's a bad choice, he can still technically fight if he wants to. This fight would do very good money and viewership wise. It would get 752,000 buys on Sky Box Office, giving Golovkin more attention to his career. As an opponent, I would give Kell Brook a B+. And as a fighter, I think Kell Brook was the best fighter Golovkin faced to this point. But Gennady's next opponent would be levels above all the guys he's already fought. So, Golovkin had just beat a tough and undefeated Kell Brook in his backyard in September of 2016. So what's next for Golovkin? Well, Gennady was 36-0 with 33 knockouts, and he was 34 years old, so you'd think he'd only have 1 or 2 years left, so he needed a good, elite, and experienced name for his resume. So let's take a look at the 160-pound middleweight division. So the supposed top guy, Canelo, ran away from Golovkin and would fight Liam Smith 1 week after Golovkin's fight with Brook, and he straight up vacated, so he's out of the picture. Let's look at the top 5 at middleweight according to Ring Magazine at the time. Golovkin was obviously number 1, so let's look at number 5 through 2. Number 5 was Andy Lee, who hadn't fought in a year since losing to Billy Joe Saunders and wouldn't fight again for 3 more years. And Andy Lee was already one of the guys ducking Golovkin, so yeah, that wasn't happening. Number 4 was David Lemieux, and Triple G already obliterated him, so that's off the table. Number 3 was the WBO belt holder Billy Joe Saunders, who showed no interest in fighting Golovkin, so that's off the table. And then the number 2 middleweight in the world was the Miracle Man, Daniel Jacobs. Jacobs was the second best middleweight in the world, and this fight did seem like a viable option. There hadn't been a lot of talks about him and Golovkin fighting because he just recently got back up in the middleweight ranks. Daniel Jacobs was a top middleweight for a while, but back in 2010, a green 23-year-old Jacobs would get knocked out by 16-0 Dmitry Pirog. Shortly after the loss, it was discovered that Daniel Jacobs had osteosarcoma, a rare form of bone cancer that he had and most likely had going into the Pirog fight. Jacobs had a tumor in his spine, but thankfully, he had a successful surgery to get it removed. Unfortunately though, the doctors told him, "You might never walk again, so forget boxing completely as a profession." But this didn't bring Jacobs down, and he did everything he could to come back, going to the boxing gym every single day in a wheelchair for several months. And eventually, 19 months later, 26-year-old Jacobs would be back in the ring cancer-free with a new moniker, the Miracle Man. And Jacobs would be fresher and hungrier than ever. So before cancer, Jacob had a record of 22-1 with 19 knockouts, his only loss being to undefeated Dmitry Pirog, as I said. But that fight had a lot of backstory to it. Jacob's grandma passed away 3 days before the fight, and like I said, it's most likely Jacobs had cancer in this fight. And still, Jacobs would be winning the fight before getting dropped in round 5. And the stoppage was kinda iffy because Jacobs went down really hard, but he wasn't out and got really pissed at Robert Byrd for stopping it. But he was 23, likely had cancer, and had issues going in, so there's more to it than it says on paper. He had one other notable fight before cancer, and that would be 1 year prior in 2009, where he would have a nice unanimous decision win against Ishe Smith that would give him some great experience. Daniel was also a spectacular amateur, having a record of 137-7 and beating guys like Sean Porter, who he would end up beating a total of 6 times. But enough of his career before cancer, let's take a look at the newer Jacobs. So Jacobs was a totally different guy after his cancer diagnosis. I think that for some people, a long layoff can really help their career, and Jacobs got a whole 1.5 years to get his thing straight before he got back in the ring. But not just that, Jacobs was a lot hungrier, he was older, and more experienced. He officially made his return on October 20th, 2012, and he would get 6 straight knockouts in a row before fighting his first step up in competition since cancer. 25-1-2 Caleb Truax in April of 2015. Jacobs was the number 12 ranked middleweight in the world, and Truax was 17, so it would be a fight to see where Jacobs was after all this time. And Jacobs looked better than ever, outboxing and outclassing his best opponent to date. He showed great boxing ability, great offense, and good counterpunching. He also showed the ability to be able to fight out of both stances, and the only other fighter in boxing that I know that can switch stances effectively is Terrence Crawford. So only 2 fighters currently in boxing can do this well, and Jacobs could, which was a great tool in his arsenal. Going into the final round, Truax had lost every round, but he stood in there, and it seemed like he was going to end Jacobs' 6-fight knockout streak. But Jacobs wouldn't let that happen. He would get Truax on the ropes and land a killer right hook that made Truax fall back into the ropes, and the referee officially called it a knockdown. Truax would get up, but Jacobs would go after him. He would throw the same jab right hook combination that landed over and over on Truax that made the referee step in and stop the fight. Daniel Jacobs would beat Caleb Truax by KO 12 on April 4th, 2015. 4 months later, on August 1st, 2015, Daniel Jacobs would face 28-3-2 Sergio Mora. Halfway into round 1, Jacobs would catch Mora with a picture-perfect right hook that sent him down. Mora would get up, and as soon as he got up, Jacobs would run after him to finish the fight. But while being careless, Mora would catch Jacobs with his hardest left hook and actually drop Daniel Jacobs. Jacobs would get up. He wasn't hurt, but it just goes to show you that in boxing, one punch can change a whole fight. Some people call Jacobs chinny for this because Mora isn't a huge puncher. But when you look at it, he was just careless, hit with a really good punch, and fell down from balance. But it was a knockdown. Jacobs would control the rest of the round, and soon the round was over. Jacobs would be winning round 2 before Mora injures his leg, causing a second round technical knockout for Jacobs. but there was unfinished business between these two. Jacobs would soon get the chance to prove if he's ready to fight the top dogs at middleweight when he fought number 3 ranked middleweight in the world, 32-0 Kid Chocolate, Peter Quillin. Quillin was one of the champions who ducked Golovkin like the plague, but had plenty of experience against top 10 guys. He had a TKO win against Gabe Rosado, a unanimous decision win over 27-0 Hassan Nadam, and earlier in the year had a draw with the number 6 ranked middleweight in the world, 34-2 Andy Lee. So this definitely would be a test for Daniel Jacobs. Only 1 minute into the first round, Daniel Jacobs would catch Quillin with a perfect right hand that hurts Quillin. Jacobs would go for the kill, and when he did, he showed amazing hand speed, the fastest at middleweight by far. He would then catch Quillin with 2 more right hooks that prompted referee Harvey Dock to stop the fight. Jacobs would beat the number 3 ranked middleweight in the world by first round technical knockout, upgrading him to the number 2 middleweight in the world. But enough of all of Jacobs, this is a series about G. So after this, in September of 2016, he would beat Mora again in a rematch. And then we go to December of 2016, where Golovkin and Jacobs were both available to fight. On December 17th, 2016, it was officially announced that Gennady Golovkin and Daniel Jacobs would fight at Madison Square Garden on March 18th. On Friday, March 17th at their weigh-in, Golovkin would come in at 159.6 pounds and Jacobs came in at 159.8. But Daniel Jacobs declined to participate in the mandatory IBF weight check 6 a.m. on Saturday morning, meaning he wouldn't be able to win that belt when he fights Golovkin. Golovkin came in at 169, 1 pound below the 170-pound limit by the IBF, but Jacobs completely missed it. Not only is this a cheap way to get an advantage, but it's just generally a really shitty thing to do. There was an article saying that Jacobs was 176 when he woke up, according to Jacobs' coach, but nothing is official. There's also a famous picture on Twitter a couple years ago that it was extremely rare to find back then, so I can't find it now. But there is a picture of Daniel Jacobs and his nutritionist, Chris Algieri, taking a picture eating a bunch of chicken wings right after the weigh-in to balloon up in weight. I thought I might just be crazy, but while rewatching the weigh-in, Chris Algieri and Daniel Jacobs were literally wearing a shirt of the chicken wings restaurant they went to. So Jacobs had an extremely cheap weight advantage going on, and I'm 99% sure he went into the ring above 180 pounds. Around 185 to be exact, and Golovkin was around 173. So Jacobs had about a dozen-pound weight advantage coming into the ring. But without further ado, let's finally get to this fight. On March 18th, 2017, Gennady Triple G Golovkin would finally get the big drama show he asked for, when he would fight the number 2 ranked middleweight in the world and the number 1 challenger in the world, the Miracle Man, 32-1 Daniel Jacobs. The fight would start with Golovkin immediately cutting off the ring and snapping Jacobs' head back with a jab, but Jacobs would do a good job landing jabs of his own and trying to shoe shine, with all punches hitting Golovkin's arms or gloves. Neither guy would land a power punch this round, and it was just a battle of the jabs, and Golovkin's jab was snappier and heavier, and Golovkin controlled the round with his ring generalship. And at the end of each round, I will be showing my score so you guys can see who's winning the fight. I had Golovkin winning the first round, and so did all 3 of the judges. Golovkin would start round 2, cutting the ring off, and would snap Jacobs' head back with a jab. Jacobs would go southpaw and land a straight left hand, the best punch from either man so far up to this point. But Golovkin would come right back and get Jacobs on the ropes and land his own straight right. And remember, up to this point, Golovkin was known as a knockout machine, and we've never really seen him in a competitive fight, so it probably looked more competitive than it actually was. Golovkin would control it with the jab, but Jacobs would land a few nice shots. It was a close round, and I can understand if you give it to Jacobs, but I think you'd have to edge it to Golovkin. But only one of the judges gave the round to Golovkin, while the other 2 gave it to Jacobs. Jacobs would start round 3 as a southpaw, and Golovkin would once again begin to cut the ring off on him. Jacobs would try to shoe shine to look good in front of the judges, but no punches would land, once again all on Golovkin's arms or gloves. Jacobs tried this round, but against Golovkin's jab and accuracy, it was no use. G was timing his straight right hands and snapping Daniel's head back with the jab for the first 2 minutes. But with 30 seconds left, Jacobs would hit Golovkin with an extremely cheap shot, a left hand where he was holding Golovkin with his other hand. And because there was only 20 seconds left, most judges will remember what happened last in a round. And even though Golovkin dominated the round, Jacobs had one little good punch in the last 20 seconds. It was a clear Golovkin round, but unfortunately, one judge fell for the trap that I just mentioned and gave round 3 to Jacobs, but the other two would give it to Golovkin. About 30 seconds into round 4, Daniel Jacobs would turn southpaw and Golovkin would throw 2 overhand rights, and boom, Jacobs was down. It was more of an off-balance shot, it wasn't a real thunderous knockdown, and Jacobs wasn't hurt, but when Jacobs got back up, Golovkin would slowly begin to break Jacobs down, while at the same time being careful on the attack because of Jacobs' power and speed. But G was really snapping his head back with jabs and uppercuts. Jacobs survived the round, but there was no question who won it. Golovkin won 10-8 because of the knockdown, and all 3 judges scored it that way. Jacobs survived the round, but there was no question who won it. Golovkin won 10-8 with a knockdown, and all 3 judges scored it that way. So through 4 rounds, you could have had it either 4 rounds to 0 or 3 rounds to 1 to Golovkin with a knockdown. Golovkin would start round 5 like every other round at this point, slowly and methodically cutting the ring off on Jacobs and stalking him like a predator. G would soon land a huge overhand right that seemed to shake Jacobs up a bit, but he managed to stay on his feet. Golovkin would soon go back to the jab and throw 3 jabs in a row, all snapping Jacobs' head back. And I remember watching this fight with my brother, and he laughed at this, saying Jacobs was like a bobblehead. And he really was. G would soon land his best and hardest body punch of the fight so far, a brutal left hook right to the liver, but Jacobs just nodded his head as if to say, good shot. Jacobs would have some success later in the round, but it wasn't nearly enough to win the round. G won round 5 and took it on all 3 of the judges' scorecards. In round 6, Jacobs would start the round quicker, using his hand speed to shoeshine and back up Golovkin.
Jacobs erupting sporadically.
Jacobs would start to find success in the southpaw stance, but Golovkin's pressure, jab, and IQ was so good, you had to stay focused 100% of the time and not make any mistakes. And Daniel was staying focused and not making mistakes. He landed his best punch of the fight so far, the same right hook that knocked out Peter Quillen he landed on Golovkin, but Golovkin didn't even flinch. But Golovkin is literally a machine, so that's understandable. But Jacobs was really starting to score clean shots this round, using his hand speed well and staying smart.
His fight by a little bit against Pirog.
And although G would land the occasional jab, Jacobs' shoeshining, hand speed, and power shots would dictate round 6. Daniel looked really good in this round, and he won the round on my card and all 3 of the judges' scorecards. But Jacobs needed to rally back. All 3 judges had him down 4 rounds to 2, and he was down 5-1 on my card. Jacobs would start round 7 landing a great uppercut on Golovkin. Then he began to shoeshine and use his jab well while in the southpaw stance. Then later in the round in the southpaw stance, he would use feints to set up a really nice combo on Golovkin with 2 really big punches landing. Whenever Golovkin got Jacobs into a corner, Jacobs would shoeshine his way out of the corner. Golovkin landed a few good jabs in the round, but it was far and in between. Jacobs once again looked really good in round 7, showing great boxing IQ and hand speed. Jacobs would take round 7 on my card and 2 out of the 3 judges' scorecards. After winning 2 rounds in a row, Jacobs looked ready to come out and fight in round 8, and the 2 boxers were back at it again. Round 8 would be more competitive. G would catch Jacobs with straight right hands while Jacobs was in the southpaw stance, and G also started to land his jab with more regularity. But Jacobs was still a live dog, using his athleticism and hand speed to back Golovkin up. Golovkin would soon land a really good right hook, but Jacobs would take it no problem. Round 8 would be a really close round, and I really could see it either way, but I'm going to give it to Jacobs, just because I feel he did a little bit more in the round. But all 3 judges would disagree with me and give the round to Golovkin, which is no problem because like I said, I could see it either way. Jacobs would start round 9 letting his hands go and shoeshining, which is one of the things that made him have the most success so far. But Golovkin was throwing his jab more and starting to land more, and made Jacobs much more cautious before coming in to throw his punches. Jacobs would land a good power shot and shoeshine, but Golovkin was taking control of the fight in this round. Gennady soon landed a really good uppercut on Jacobs, and Jacobs managed to come back with beautiful counters, a right hook and left hook combo displaying brilliant hand speed. Golovkin would then land another uppercut, and this one would hurt Daniel Jacobs. If you look closely, right after being hit with this brilliant uppercut, Jacobs holds Golovkin to try to prevent Golovkin from throwing while he was dazed. But Golovkin soon got out of the grip of Jacobs and began throwing bombs. But Jacobs didn't seem too bothered because he was showing great upper body movement to stop Golovkin's onslaught. But Golovkin would soon catch him with an absolute perfect jab that snapped his head back and knocked him into the ropes and really seemed to hurt him this time. But luckily for Jacobs, it was the end of the round. But he wouldn't throw any punches for 15 seconds during that period of time. But Golovkin did bring it home that round and clearly won the ninth, almost stopping Jacobs in the process. All three judges would give the round to Golovkin. G would start round 10, landing his jab and snapping Jacobs' head back, but it seemed like Jacobs felt a sense of urgency and knew he was down on the cards, because he really started to let his hands go. He'd been more active than he'd been the entire fight, and even though Golovkin would land the occasional jab, it wasn't enough to beat the power punching and the speed of Jacobs. Jacobs finished the round really strong and landed a great left hook on Golovkin, and it was a very decisive round for Jacobs, and he won it on all three of the judges' scorecards. But when Jacobs got back to his corner, we would start to see the toll that Golovkin's punches was taking on him. His eyes were starting to be puffed up, and he spit up a ton of blood into the corner bucket. We were now entering rounds 11 and 12, the championship rounds, and Golovkin would stalk Jacobs like a predator at the beginning of round 11 and land some clean jabs on him to start the round off. We were starting to see OG Golovkin here, snapping Jacobs' head back with the jab and cutting the ring off masterfully. He was landing his jab at will and starting to go to the body more, and Jacobs wasn't throwing at all. Probably a mix of exhaustion and dealing with Golovkin's boxing skill. But do you remember how I said in round 3 how judges remember what happens at the end of the round most? Well, after being schooled for all of the round, Jacobs would have success in the last 5 seconds of round 11, where he landed his two best punches the entire fight, a perfect right hook and left hook combo. And while I think this was a great move, I definitely don't think he won the round because of 2 seconds of success. But all three judges fell for the trap and gave it to Jacobs when it was a clear Golovkin round. So here we go, round 12, the final round. And in this round, Golovkin didn't even care. He held and hit Jacobs, landed a flush right hook on his head as if to say, "That's for missing the IBF weight check, daddy boy." Jokes aside though, Golovkin continued off where he was in round 11 and outboxed and outworked Jacobs in round 12. So yes, an overweight blown up light heavyweight Jacobs went 12 rounds, but Golovkin clearly won the fight. As soon as the bell rung, Jacobs slumped over on the ropes in exhaustion and probably felt he won because he had given Triple G a harder test than anyone. But I had it 116-111 Golovkin, and I feel that or 115-112 Triple G is the right score, or if you're really generous, 114-113 Golovkin, even though Jacobs gave a spectacular performance. And the judges would agree with me. 2 judges scored at 115-112 for Golovkin, and 1 other judge scored at 114-113 for Golovkin. And Golovkin had won a unanimous decision against Daniel Jacobs, his first A-level win to date. Immediately after his win over Daniel Jacobs, Golovkin got some controversy for the win, and some people felt that Jacobs did enough to earn it. But did he actually? Let's talk about the scorecards. Previously, I said I had about 116-111 for Golovkin, 8 rounds to 4 with a knockdown. The judges would have it a bit closer. 2 judges had it 115-112, and 1 judge had it 114-113, all for Golovkin. Most would agree with this, because when we saw the media and fan scorecards, most leaned towards Gennady Golovkin. On BoxRec.com, they recently added a new scoring system where fans can score the fights. The overall average of the fans' scorecards was 114-112 for Gennady Golovkin. On eyeofthering.com, 77 fans scored the fight. 55 people scored it for Golovkin, 4 people scored it a draw, and 18 people scored it for Jacobs. So the fans had it 71 to 23% for Golovkin. Here were the press scores for the fight. Pause the video if you'd like. And finally, right after the fight, HBO tweeted asking who won, and 7,000 fans would vote. 57% Golovkin and 43% Jacobs, so pretty darn close. But that's enough of what other people think. Let's find a definitive answer on who won and leave no questions left who did. So let's go. They would meet in the center of the ring, but Gennady would quickly initiate things, cutting the ring off immediately. Just look at the feet and how Golovkin is methodically stalking Jacobs and pushing him back into the ropes. This 100% favors Golovkin because he's making Jacobs think more and mentally suffocating him with pressure, while he's staying composed and relaxed. The first punch thrown and landed would be a jab by both guys at the same time. Jacobs would kind of just touch Golovkin with the jab and move his face a bit, but Golovkin snapped his head back, giving him the edge in this exchange. A few seconds later, they would exchange jabs again, but Jacobs' jab got through while Golovkin's didn't, so Jacobs would get the edge in this exchange. Jacobs would soon throw a leaping left hook that would get blocked by Golovkin's gloves. Golovkin would get Jacobs near the ropes and throw a left hook right hook combo that both missed and were nicely slipped by Jacobs. Triple G would soon go back into predator mode and begin to stalk Jacobs again to get him on the ropes, and when they got in range, Golovkin put his gloves up and threw a perfect jab through the guard that snapped Jacobs' head back. They would soon exchange jabs again, with both landing with regular force, so overall everything would be pretty even, but Golovkin's ring generalship was giving him the edge. Jacobs then began to use his hand speed to shoe shine on Golovkin, and I used this term a lot in my last video, but I never really explained what shoe shining was, so I will now. Shoe shining is when you throw a flurry of punches that doesn't always land, but it is a flashy move to win rounds in front of the judges, and Jacobs shoe shined a lot in this fight, as you'll see. For the first half of round 1, it was mostly just Golovkin cutting off the ring, throwing his jab, and Jacobs was using a decent guard to block some of them, and fired some pity-pat jabs of his own. But they weren't necessarily effective shots, and I wouldn't count them as landed punches. Jacobs threw a left hook that missed, then followed up with a body jab that landed, and here's the thing. In punch counts, body jabs are the weakest punch to land usually, but they are technically landed punches, so I will count them. And we don't necessarily know the effect that they have on the opponent. Golovkin would soon land a stiff jab on Jacobs that made him follow up with a combination, but Jacobs showed great defense, moving out of the way of Golovkin's bombs. G then landed another jab that Jacobs tried to move away from and counter with 2 power shots, but he still got hit with the jab and missed the counters. Gennady would catch him with another jab, but Jacobs would come right back, but you could see whose jab was crispier and more powerful. Jacobs' jab kinda just touched Golovkin, while Golovkin's was like a telephone pole. Jacobs would soon land his best jab in the round, and Golovkin tried coming back with a 1-1-2, but Jacobs did a good job using the shoulder roll to keep away from the right hand. Golovkin would finish round 1 strong, landing 2 stiff jabs on Jacobs. Even though Golovkin only outlanded Jacobs by 2 punches, I still feel confident in saying he clearly won a close round 1. His jabs were much stronger and were moving Jacobs, and he was the ring general the entire time. Round 1 was close, but Golovkin clearly had the edge. Just like I said in my first part, Golovkin won round 1. It's funny because at the beginning of every round, you'll probably hear me say, Golovkin starts the round off stalking Jacobs, because it's literally exactly what he does at the beginning of every round. He's like a machine. He did a tremendous job with footwork and ring generalship this fight. It actually is funny though, because Golovkin looks like a real animal stalking its prey. Look at him just slowly walk Jacobs down and try to corner him. I can't say it enough, it's absolutely brilliant. I also forgot to mention, Jacobs would turn southpaw this round and try to confuse Golovkin. And it would seem to work, because only 30 seconds in, Jacobs would land his best punch yet, a straight left hand from the southpaw stance. Jacobs would start throwing a combination that you frequently see him do if you watch him fight. A triple jab combo where he jabs to the head, then the body, then the head, and he caught Gennady with a nice jab at the end. Jacobs would throw the same combination again, and once again get the jab at the end of the combo to land. While Jacobs was doing good, Golovkin always had the jab to keep him in the fight, and as I've said over and over throughout the series, Golovkin has the best jab in boxing history. While Golovkin was landing the jab, Jacobs was having more success, and he caught Gennady with a very good counter left hook. But the problem was, it was so quick that you couldn't see it. And this was a problem Jacobs frequently has in his fights. Because he's one of the fastest fighters in boxing, some punches aren't visible to the judges because they're so quick. Jacobs was doing a great job this round at slipping Golovkin's punches, but Golovkin's ring generalship was elite like I said, and Jacobs constantly had to waste time mentally on not getting cornered. Golovkin would finish round 2 by landing a nice right hand to the body, making the round even closer, and at the end of round 2, they would both land the same amount of punches, 4. So not a lot of action in the first 2 rounds, but Jacobs did better this round than he did in the first. Jacobs landed more power shots and the harder punches overall, and if you remember, I previously said last episode that it was a close round, but I'd give Golovkin the edge. But I disagree after doing a closer look into it. Jacobs clearly took the edge in a close round. So going into round 3, rounds 1 and 2 were close, but I feel they were decisive after looking in punch by punch. After having some success in the southpaw stance in the second, Jacobs came out that way when starting the third before quickly changing back to orthodox, probably trying to confuse Golovkin a bit with his feet. But 30 seconds in, Golovkin would move in and get Jacobs near the ropes where he landed his best jab so far, a stiff, beautifully thrown punch. He would then follow up and land the best punch of the fight so far, and the way he set this up was absolutely beautiful. Instead of just throwing a straight right hand where Jacobs' head was, he timed him and knew where his head was going to be, and he waited a little before Jacobs' head was to his right and threw it an inch away, catching Jacobs right on the face. 5 seconds later, they would exchange jabs, with Golovkin landing and Jacobs missing. Then Golovkin would land a straight right hand right through Jacobs' guard. Jacobs knew he was getting outboxed and started shoe shining again to catch the judge's eye. And while it looked good, no punches would land for him. Golovkin would land another jab, and he was really starting to outclass Jacobs in this round. Golovkin then timed another straight right hand on Jacobs, with it landing flush. Jacobs wouldn't land his first punch till more than halfway through round 1, where he landed a jab that Golovkin moved away from, but he did touch Golovkin with it, so it's a scoring shot. Last episode, I previously mentioned that judges notice what happens at the end of the round most, and after Golovkin boxed beautifully and dominated the round, Jacobs landed his first good punch at the end of the round, but it was a cheap shot when they were in the clinch, but I guess I'll count it. Golovkin came back with a jab-like left hook, and you can actually see Jacobs' face fat wobble from being hit with it. But besides that one shot by Jacobs at the end, it was a dominant round for Golovkin. He would land 3 times as many punches as Jacobs in the round, outland Jacobs in every category, and was cutting off the ring brilliantly. Because Golovkin dropped Jacobs in round 4 and clearly won 10-8 on everyone's scorecards, I don't feel like I need to narrate for this round, I'll just show you the punches landed. Golovkin would 10-8 Jacobs in round 4. He dropped him and outlanded him by 22 punches. And through 4 rounds, this is how the fight is going. 3-1 Golovkin with a knockdown. 20 seconds into round 5, Golovkin would land a right hand bomb. Jacobs would roll with it, but it was still a huge punch that seemed to bother Jacobs a bit. Gennady would land a jab and a left hook before throwing 3 jabs in a sequence, with every single jab landing. Gennady then landed his best body shot in the fight just a few seconds later, a left hook right to the liver. Jacobs would nod his head as if to say, good shot, but Golovkin would jab him in the face right after. And just a second before the jab landed, Jacobs had switched to southpaw, which is odd because switching to southpaw is what got him dropped last round, so Jacobs was being very ballsy. Golovkin noticed the switch and threw 2 straight right hands, with the second one landing. Golovkin would land another straight right in the round while Jacobs was a southpaw, but Jacobs was having a lot more success in the last minute of the round than he was in the first 2, landing good jabs on Golovkin and good body punches. But it wasn't nearly enough. Golovkin would dominate the fifth. He outlanded Jacobs 12-4 in punches landed, dictated the pace, and neutralized Jacobs with a jab. Jacobs would start shoe shining early in the sixth and letting his hands go on Golovkin, displaying his awesome hand speed in full display. Jacobs would switch to southpaw and land a good scoring straight left hand on Golovkin. But when you're a southpaw, you're more open to right hands, and Golovkin would throw a good straight right that landed on Jacobs, followed by two good jabs. Golovkin was doing really good with the jab this round, but Jacobs would catch Golovkin with a perfect right hook on the ear, his best punch of the fight so far. Golovkin would snap his head back with jabs as a response, and Daniel's response to this was to throw a mean body combination with the last body punch landing. Jacobs was having more success this round, but Golovkin's jab always kept him head to head with Jacobs the entire time. And I really tried to give Jacobs every edge I could in this fight just to be sure I wasn't giving Golovkin any extra credit because he was my favorite fighter, but I can't ignore the numbers here. Golovkin clearly dictated the pace with the jab, and it looked like to a lot of people, myself included, that Jacobs won the round because he did better than rounds 4 and 5, but Golovkin clearly won this round. And you know, Jacobs, he did good, but Golovkin is just the better fighter. You just can't make a case for Daniel that round. Halfway through the fight, it was 5-1 for Golovkin, so Jacobs had to turn it up. I said the same thing in part 1, but rounds 2 and 6 were switched up, so the scoring was still the same. But Jacobs must have sensed that, because in round 7, he was letting his hands go more and having a lot more success, particularly from the southpaw stance. Golovkin had him in a corner and was ready to unload, and Jacobs knew he could have gotten stopped right there, so he held Golovkin, a very smart move. Jacobs soon landed his best combination of the fight, throwing some feints to set up a straight left hand and right hook from the southpaw stance that both landed on Golovkin. Golovkin responded and came back with two strong jabs and moved Jacobs into the corner, but Jacobs would fight his way out of the corner by shoe shining. Golovkin would finish the round better by landing two jabs, with one of them being the hardest of the fight, moving Jacobs more than any other jab had yet. But Jacobs clearly won round 7. It was a great display of boxing by him. Earlier in the video, I said how I gave Jacobs a little extra credit in this fight just to take away some bias because Golovkin is my favorite fighter, but I was giving Jacobs way too much credit. I said round 8 was close in part 1, and I edged it to Jacobs, but when I actually looked punch for punch, round 8 was a clear round for Golovkin. Jacobs had some flurries, but his punches just didn't have a lot of pop to them compared to Golovkin, and Triple G was outlanding him by a lot. And this is why I really wanted to make a part 2, to shut the Golovkin haters up and do a film study on punch count on what really happened. And Golovkin had a lot of disadvantages going into this fight. The dozen-pound weight advantage, like I said, he had a height disadvantage, and Jacobs was in his absolute prime, and everyone expected Golovkin to walk through Jacobs when Jacobs, and yes, I'll say it, would have most likely beaten Canelo Alvarez on this night. And oh yeah, his trainer Andre Rozier was training Curtis Stevens in his fight with Golovkin, so Rozier had a knowledge on fighting Golovkin once already. Round 9 would be the most entertaining round of the fight so far up to this point. Both came out swinging, and Jacobs would land a nice uppercut on Golovkin to start. G would go to his jab, landing a couple jabs before timing a straight right on Jacobs. While Golovkin was working and landing his jab, Jacobs would land some nice jabs of his own. Jacobs would let his hands go more, landing some good power punches and shoe shining. But Golovkin was winning the round. He was landing jabs and landing uppercuts on the inside. And Golovkin would soon hit Jacobs with a brutal right uppercut right under Jacobs' throat, and I'm honestly surprised Jacobs didn't go down. And not only would he not go down, but he would immediately fire back with hard hooks that both landed. And he would even land a few more power punches after that exchange. Golovkin would go back to his best punch though, the jab, and soon he would land another brutal right uppercut that seemed to buzz Jacobs a bit because Jacobs would immediately hold on to Golovkin to try and prevent him from following up. But Golovkin would follow up, throwing a lot of hard shots and catching Jacobs with some hooks. He would time another straight right hand that landed, and while Jacobs tried getting his position back, Golovkin would land his best jab of the fight, a head-snapping, stiff jab that made Jacobs' ears wobble. Jacobs seemed a bit buzzed, but his legs were under him, and he would even manage to withstand another right hand and two other jabs, and he would end the round by landing a nice hook on Golovkin. Golovkin and Jacobs would land the most power punches in this round than they did in any other round up to this point. But Golovkin clearly won, hurting Jacobs and landing some beautifully timed uppercuts. And now it looks like we just got 3 rounds left, rounds 10, 11, and 12. Andre Rozier told Jacobs in the corner after the 9th that he was winning the round, but he gave it back by getting careless, and that he lost the round. And that seemed to light a fire under Jacobs, because he came out swinging in round 10. And Golovkin is always competitive, and even to this day, I don't think he's had a single round in his career where he's been dominated. He always lands his jab, and his accuracy keeps him in fights. But even up to this point in 2021, I don't think I've ever seen him lose a round like this. And it was close, and I'm serious, that's how good Golovkin was. Jacobs wouldn't just land power punches in this round though. He would start to set up his jab in the southpaw stance later in the round, and he was having a lot of success with it. And after clearly controlling the round, Jacobs would end the round even better, landing 2 great left hooks on Golovkin, and Jacobs would clearly take the 10th. And that just goes to show you how great Golovkin is though. In his entire career, out of all of his opponents, the round he lost most, the opponent only landed 5 more punches. So here we go, rounds 11 and 12, the championship rounds. Through 10 rounds, Golovkin was winning 97-92, or 7 rounds to 3. And while Jacobs clearly won the 10th, it seemed that Golovkin was putting the fight back in his hands, because Golovkin was clearly winning the round. He started doing body work. He landed 4 body shots this round, and up to this point, he had only landed 4 body punches through 10 rounds. So he was doing good work. He was using his jab well and landing the uppercut. But Jacobs would slowly start to come back in the 2nd minute. And in the 3rd minute, Jacobs would go crazy and do insanely good, making the round even on my scorecard. And as much as I don't want to do a swing round and a punch count like this, I can't pick a winner in this round. But let's just give it to Jacobs to make things a little bit closer. And my computer is not built for video editing, guys. That's why I like to keep these videos under 20 minutes. My computer fan is going crazy the longer the video is, which makes it harder to voice over, and I don't want it to overheat. So I'll just show you guys the punches in the 12th round, the final score, and the total punches landed. But thank you guys for watching, and yeah, I'll see you next time. We have already covered 19 Golovkin opponents so far in this series in only 10 episodes, which is crazy to me because it doesn't feel like that at all. We only have 6 more fights to go before we reach present day Golovkin. But don't worry, we still have a lot of episodes left because Golovkin is still fighting, and these upcoming 6 fights I'm going to cover will define his legacy. But before all that, let's take a look at his legacy right after the win over Jacobs in March of 2017. 2 weeks after to be exact, because Golovkin would turn 35 on April 8th. He just came off his best win and he had no opponent announced yet. So on April 8th, 2017, he turned 35 years old and had a record of 37-0 with 33 knockouts. He was the unified middleweight champion, having 3 of the 4 belts. He was ranked the #1 middleweight in the world by everyone, and the win over Jacobs put him even higher. And while he was #1, here are the rankings of his last 10 opponents at middleweight. In his last 10 fights, he fought 4 guys in the top 5, 5 guys in the top 10, 9 guys in the top 15, and all of them in the top 20. The average ranking of opponents he fought in his last 10 title defenses was 9, so the average guy he fought was in the top 10, which is very good. I tried to find another champion today to compare to, but no one in boxing has had this many title defenses to go off of. And speaking of title defenses, I didn't even cover all of his defenses. He's had 18 up to this point, which is 2 defenses away from the middleweight record, 20 by Bernard Hopkins. So Golovkin at this point was already a certified Hall of Famer and a top 10 middleweight of all time. And finally, I'll wrap this up and give my opinion for Golovkin's top 3 wins in his career to this point. So, he's really only had one real elite name on his record up to this point, but like I said, over and over, it's not his fault for being the most avoided fighter in boxing history. But enough of the recap, you guys want the fights, so let's get to them. After beating Jacobs, this would give Golovkin some opportunities for the bigger fights. The big names who were ducking him before saw this as a chance to beat Golovkin, because as I said in the second part, this fight was controversial. It was his toughest test in his career, and it ended his 23-fight knockout streak. But Golovkin clearly won, as I proved in the last episode, but he got hit way more than we're used to seeing, and no one's ever gone 12 rounds with him. Not to mention, Golovkin was 35, and usually around 34 is the age where boxers really start to show their age. The WBO belt holder, Billy Joe Saunders, immediately started talking trash right after Golovkin's fight with Jacobs, calling Golovkin washed and beatable and all types of other stuff. Now this fight would be important because this would be for the undisputed status in all 4 belts at middleweight. So negotiations for that fight went on at the end of March, and it seemed possible that the two could face off in June, but things quickly fell off and that fight was scrapped. Canelo Alvarez, the man who vacated his 160 belt to avoid Golovkin and go down a weight class, would fight Chavez Jr. at a catchweight of 164 2 months after Golovkin's fight with Jacobs. Now this makes no sense at all. Why would Canelo refuse to fight at 160 and only stay at 54? Then all of a sudden he goes even higher than 160 to fight Chavez, okay? Because Saunders lost his pen to Golovkin, G would go to ringside at the Chavez-Canelo fight to see about possibly facing the winner. I remember watching this fight live, and it was one of the worst fights I'd ever seen. Chavez Jr. didn't throw any punches at all. People say he just came to survive, and yeah, I agree. He probably took the fight knowing he'd most likely lose, but he would get a career-high payday, so why not take it? But one of the reasons I think he didn't throw a lot was because of Canelo's counter-punching. Earlier in the series, I mentioned how good of a counter-puncher Canelo is, and he proved it in this fight. Canelo would go on the ropes and lure Chavez into punch, and Canelo would come back with like 8 counter punches in response. It was awesome.
It's a mismatch, and it was one going in.
That was one of the closest things we've seen for a Chavez rally, and you saw how Canelo responded to it.
And because of the counter punching, Chavez Jr. just decided not to punch a lot and to just survive, so Canelo would easily take a 12-round decision. Okay, before we go any further, guys, I have to show you this. So while doing research for Chavez Jr. and Canelo, both men went on like a Spanish version of ESPN and both fought this virtual boxer thing, and I'll just show you the clip.
La misma combinación.
Okay, all jokes aside though, Canelo won a unanimous decision, and Max Kellerman asked him, who's next?
Who is it?
Golovkin, you are next, my friend.
Oh yeah, that's right. The super fight was here. Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin for middleweight supremacy. When they stood next to each other, Golovkin looked a solid 3 inches taller and had a way bigger frame, and Canelo had never fought a 160 yet before, so this made it even more interesting. The fight would be on September 16th, Mexican Independence Day, to make the fight even bigger.
Triple G, is there anything you'd like to tell Canelo?
Good luck in September.
Canelo, anything you'd like to tell Triple G?
La suerte es para los mediocres, my friend.
Luck is for the mediocre people.
Well, apparently Christmas is going to come really early this year, folks. Jim?
This fight would be the #1 fight in boxing for many reasons. Canelo is the biggest star in boxing. The entire country of Mexico is cheering him on in all of his fights, and he's already had 7 fights on pay-per-view up to this point. And the average buys of all those was 810,000. And his pay-per-view fight with Mayweather in 2013 was the 5th best-selling pay-per-view event of all time, with 2.2 million buys. So Alvarez was a superstar, and he'd been fighting as a pro since he was 15, so he's had a lot of time to rack up fans. And Golovkin was a big star in the sport as well. He had had 3 fights on pay-per-view up to this point against Lemieux, Brook, and Jacobs, with the average buys of those 3 fights being 358,000, which is still very good, and the styles of each fighter and their records would make this fight even better. Let's talk about Canelo, because we already know where Golovkin was at this point and everything he's done. I mean, it is a series after all. Canelo was 49-1-1 with 34 knockouts. He won the WBC Super Welterweight title back in 2011 against Matthew Hatton, and made 5 defenses of his belt before he stepped up in 2013 to fight his biggest test to date, 26-0 Austin Trout. And Trout was an elite fighter. He isn't as good as Daniel Jacobs, but I'd still classify him as elite. He was the WBA World Champion, so this fight would be a unification between the WBA and WBC belts as Super Welterweight. And Canelo was only 22 here, so he was unifying belts at 22, which is insane. So Canelo would already be fighting elite fighters at the age of 22, so he would have plenty of experience before fighting Golovkin. Canelo showed who he was in this fight. He showed amazing upper body movement and accuracy against Trout and won unanimous decision, even dropping him in round 7. So Canelo at 22 was already the unified super welterweight champion. This would be the fight that put Canelo on the map as a pound-for-pound fighter. At such a young age, he had so many tools in his arsenal. He was powerful, quick, extremely sound defensively, and had an extremely high boxing IQ. Later in the year, he fought one of the best fighters of all time in 44-0 Floyd Mayweather Jr., and he got extremely outclassed. Mayweather would box circles around him, possibly winning every round. But Canelo was too young when this fight happened. He was 23 and Mayweather was 36 and had 13 more years of experience boxing than Canelo did. But Canelo was still a top 10 fighter in the world with the win over Trout, and he learned a lot of things from this loss, and in the end it probably made him a better fighter. He won 6 fights in a row after this before fighting Golovkin, with 2 elite wins over Miguel Cotto and Erislandy Lara. And because he was so young, the more fights he fought, the more experience he would get. And when the Golovkin fight came around, he was still only 27. But speaking of age, Golovkin might have possibly been declining, not because of the Jacobs fight, because Jacobs is great, but rather because he was 35. So this 8-year age gap gave Canelo a big edge going in. But Golovkin won't age as fast as certain fighters because of his fighting style. Some guys base their styles off athleticism. One of the best fighters ever, Roy Jones Jr., based his style off of speed and being able to move really well. But when he reached the age of 34, he got knocked out and never recovered because he didn't have his athleticism and speed to help him out, which is what made him such a great fighter in the first place. But Golovkin doesn't fight like that. He doesn't use athleticism or explosive flurries to win fights. He's all ring IQ and technique. He's honestly one of the best punchers in boxing history, and what I mean by that is the way he throws a punch. He throws punches so perfectly. He doesn't telegraph them at all. He knows when to throw a punch, how to twist and turn into punches, and how to time an opponent. And because of this, he doesn't have to worry about throwing a ton or using athleticism to tire himself out. And because he's so physically strong, he doesn't have guys backing him up. And being backed up when you're not trying to really tires you out. But Golovkin is always the aggressor, so he doesn't need to worry about this. So if Golovkin was on a decline, it would be a slow decline. He wouldn't just age overnight. So past his peak or not, he was still at least 75% of the fighter he was when he fought guys like Lemieux. But this would give Canelo a small advantage, but could Canelo, a young 27-year-old, pull it off? What could he do that would give Golovkin trouble? Well, let's look. What was Daniel Jacobs doing that gave him success? Well, there was a few things. One was his athleticism and his speed. Jacobs was 30 years old and in the absolute peak of his career. He had the most speed he was ever going to have, and as I said before in the Jacobs episode, he has insane speed. He's one of the fastest middleweights in history, in my honest opinion. And some punches are so quick from him that you just can't avoid him, so that was giving Golovkin trouble. Another thing was power. Jacobs punches really hard, and it kept Golovkin from just going in and unleashing punches on Jacobs without a care in the world. If you remember previously, Golovkin would openly let himself get hit by Willie Monroe Jr. and Dominic Wade, but Jacobs was strong enough to make Golovkin think twice. And finally, Jacob just had a terrific boxing IQ. He was a fantastic boxer. So what does Canelo bring to the table? Well, let's look. First off, he had more experience fighting top guys than Golovkin. Once again though, not Golovkin's fault because he was ducked so much. But on paper, Canelo had fought better guys. He went 12 rounds with Floyd Mayweather, Austin Trout, Miguel Cotto, and Erislandy Lara. All guys were ranked top 3 in their weight class, and Canelo went 3-1 in those fights, which is pretty damn good. So those guys gave him some experience on what it's like to fight the best in the world. Another thing Canelo can use in his toolset is his elite defense. Well, I said, no matter who you are, Golovkin will hit you because he's just that accurate, but Canelo has top 3 defense in the sport, like, no question. But he was mostly good at head movement, and head movement doesn't work against Golovkin because he's literally so accurate with the jab and straight punches that you can't move your head away from the punch in time. And you'll see what I'm talking about later on, but to beat Golovkin, one of the things you gotta have is a great glove guard. And I felt Martin Murray was the one guy that fought Golovkin that did a tremendous job blocking G's straight punches with his gloves, because he kept them up so high the whole time. But Canelo is the type of guy to keep his hands down and move his body, which doesn't work well with G. So it seemed that one of Canelo's best abilities might be taken away, but I'm imagining I haven't seen this fight up to this point, so maybe his defense works or maybe it doesn't. I don't want to spoil anything yet. But what else did he do? Well, Canelo's a fantastic counterpuncher, which could be a huge advantage for Alvarez because for a guy who comes forward like Golovkin, great counterpunchers like Canelo could give him trouble. But I feel like we are wasting time just talking on Canelo here because it is a series on Golovkin's resume. So the moment you've all been waiting for has arrived. On September 16th, 2017, WBC, WBA, IBF, and IBO belt holder Gennady Triple G Golovkin would face the lineal Ring Magazine champion, Saul Canelo Alvarez. This would be the 19th defense of Golovkin's WBA belt and the second defense of Alvarez's Ring Magazine belt, and this would be the super fight we had been waiting on for years. Canelo would immediately start the fight on his bicycle, moving around the ring away from Golovkin while Golovkin was the aggressor, and this seemed to be a sign of respect towards Golovkin's power by Alvarez because he clearly didn't want to trade with him. The first punch landed in the fight was the first punch thrown by Alvarez, which was a counter jab. And one thing I want to mention is that when Canelo jabs, he jabs with an open glove, and that can mark the opponent's face up a bit. So it's a little cheap, but I mean, fair play to him. But Golovkin came back with a jab that partially landed, but not really, so I won't count it, followed by a right hand that Alvarez slipped, so Canelo won that exchange. Golovkin soon landed his first punch, a jab that Canelo countered to with a straight right to the body, but Golovkin managed to land his jab while Canelo was throwing the body shot, so I'd say this exchange was even. Golovkin was much more active, and I think Canelo didn't throw as much because he was backing up the whole time. Now, that doesn't mean Canelo was losing. He usually is the less active guy in most of his fights. He usually relies on counterpunching, pot shots, and his defense on winning. And even though Golovkin was dictating the pace of the fight and backing Canelo up, Canelo had some explosive flurries that would back Golovkin up. And I really tried to give this round to Canelo because I don't want to be biased towards Golovkin, but it really was dead even, and I usually don't do this, but I'm going to score it 10-10. And at the end of the fight, I'll comment how the fight could have been scored if you gave this round to Canelo or if you gave it to Golovkin. It really could have gone either way. One thing I didn't mention is that because Canelo makes more money in the sport and is the A side, he'll get any of the close rounds on the scorecards, and of course, all 3 judges gave round 1 to Canelo. So Golovkin had to really decisively win rounds in this fight. Round 2 started off the same way as the first, Golovkin coming forward and Canelo going back. Canelo had some explosive flurries and was using his counterpunching skill to try and outbox Golovkin, while Golovkin was staying very active, cutting off the ring and using his jab to outwork Alvarez. Canelo started to throw body punches, but Golovkin was completely prepared for it. Canelo attempted a left hook to the body, but Golovkin used his elbow to block the body shot before Canelo even threw it, which is insane ring awareness by Golovkin. While looking at this round with the general eye, for some reason this seems like a clear Canelo round, and I have no clue why because looking into it, Golovkin clearly won it. He outworked him with the jab and even landed more power punches, landing a really crisp straight right hand near the end of the round. Then with 10 seconds left in the round, Triple G threw a right hand that Canelo countered with the uppercut. Then Golovkin countered Canelo's uppercut with the left hook. The hook by G landed flush, but the uppercut by Canelo kinda just touched Golovkin, so I don't even know if this really landed flush because it didn't move Golovkin at all, but I guess I'll count it. But what I found really interesting is at the end of round 1, Canelo's corner told him to counter with the uppercut if Golovkin threw the right hand. Then after Reynoso says this, it pans to Abel Sanchez telling Golovkin that Canelo's going to counter with the uppercut, so use the left hook. And I don't know if either Abel heard Reynoso or he's just an evil genius, but this was incredible because he was right. And when Golovkin threw the left hook, it did land flush.
He's showing you his two lefts and he throws that right hook. Be careful with that. We're catching him there very good. Step back and receive him with that uppercut, okay?
Short right here. He's going to counter with the uppercut. Give me the left hook right here. Okay? Short right here. He's going to counter with the uppercut. Give me the left hook right here. Okay?
At the end of round 2, Canelo landed a nice jab to finish the round to make the punch count 9-8 in favor of Golovkin. But Golovkin won this round by a close margin. He landed a flush straight right hand and hard left hook near the end of the round, and it kinda sealed the deal for him. But Golovkin winning by a close margin means Alvarez won it on the cards, and of course, Canelo took round 2 on all 3 of the judges' scorecards. Both men started the third exchanging jabs, then Golovkin came out like a ball of fire, throwing jabs and left hooks on Canelo. He landed 2 left hooks and 2 jabs in only an 8-second sequence, which is insane. But Canelo started letting his power punches go a lot more in this round as well, which made it the most entertaining round of the fight up to this point. Canelo was putting in more body work, and Golovkin was landing his left hook through Canelo's guard. And funnily enough, at the end of round 3, it would once again be 9 punches to 8 for Golovkin, which is the exact same number as round 2. But Canelo landed the better punches overall in this one, and seemed to fight Golovkin more in the middle of the ring this round. But 2 out of 3 judges gave this round to Golovkin, while 1 judge gave it to Alvarez. So through 3 rounds, I could see this fight 3 different ways. 2-1 for Golovkin, 2-1 for Alvarez, or possibly even, which is what I had it. So far, punches landed was 27-23 in favor of Golovkin, 7-6 in power punches to Canelo, and 21 jabs to 16 for Golovkin. So extremely close contest so far. Canelo started the 4th very strong, out-jabbing and out-boxing G. Golovkin would throw and land his first good body punch of the fight, but Canelo would come right back and land his own left hook to the body in response. Canelo seemed to be winning the 4th convincingly, but then Golovkin got Canelo on the ropes for the first time of the fight. And this is where Golovkin usually does his best work, but because Canelo is such a good counterpuncher, this is good for him as well. He showed tremendous defense when Golovkin threw power shots, but Golovkin was landing his jab when Canelo wasn't really doing anything at all. Canelo put his gloves up to lure Golovkin in and say, "I thought you were this aggressive machine, why aren't you coming in to attack?" But Golovkin has a very high ring IQ, and he knew that Canelo was one of the best counterpunchers in the sport, so he could easily get clipped if he just went in to unload. Golovkin was slowly setting up his shots because Canelo would be able to block any punch he threw without setting up. So he threw a left hook, but saw Canelo was going to block it, so he didn't go through with it, and he changed it to a jab, and when Canelo put his gloves down, he landed a nice jab that snapped Canelo's head back. Canelo shook his head and got off the ropes, and probably saw that Golovkin wasn't falling for his trick, and that he'd have more success if he was off the ropes. And that proved to be the case because when he got off the ropes, it started to be very competitive again. He was landing some nice body shots, but Golovkin had his jab to always keep him in the fight. But Canelo really started to gas in this round because of the pressure by Golovkin and constantly having to move around. So it seemed that fighting on the ropes might have been the best option for him so he didn't have to move around. But this would be dangerous because he would be more open to being hit if he stayed in one spot. So Canelo had to decide what he wanted to do. Should he stay on the ropes or fight on the middle of the ring where he might gas out and not be able to see the final round? But we are only in the 4th, so I'm talking way too soon. Let's just stick to the round we're on. Round 4 was competitive because Canelo did good early, but Golovkin clearly took control in the end and landed the better punches overall. Round 4 went to Golovkin, and all 3 judges were in agreement. Golovkin must have sensed Canelo was tired because he started round 5 off quick, but Canelo began to use his jab to keep Golovkin away, and he landed the best jab of the fight by either man at this point, and it was a perfect shot right on Golovkin's cheek. Golovkin began to back Canelo up into the ropes and just started letting his hands go, and Canelo showed absolutely elite head movement, avoiding 13 punches perfectly with head movement. The only punch to partially land was at the end when Golovkin kind of pushed his glove into Canelo's face, but I'm not going to count that. And I feel like the defense Canelo just used told Golovkin that he needed to focus on boxing and not knocking Canelo out. He needed to set up his shots and win rounds. Canelo would get off the ropes and start coming forward to Golovkin more, landing some nice jabs. But Golovkin immediately started shooting that elite jab of his in return and was snapping Canelo's head back. It was another close round, but 2 minutes in, Golovkin would completely change the pace of the entire fight. G landed a nice straight right hand on Canelo, and Canelo immediately countered with his own straight right that landed. Golovkin then walked Canelo towards the ropes and landed a good jab. He then began to set up a beautiful punch. He knew that Canelo was a prolific counterpuncher, so he began to slowly jab at Canelo's left glove, purposely missing the head so Canelo would be more likely to subconsciously counter with the left hook. And Golovkin did it until Canelo countered, which wasn't too long after he got on the ropes. And once Canelo let his left hook go, Golovkin immediately let his right hand go as soon as he saw Canelo's arm move for the left hook. And Canelo had no time to react, and Golovkin caught him with an overhand bomb.
Canelo, Triple G walks right through it. Puts him back against the ropes and lands a big right hand.
It was a perfect shot right behind Canelo's ear, and it was the best punch landed of the fight for either guy. Canelo withstood the punch well. He's physically strong, has very good punch awareness, a good chin, and a naturally big head and neck to absorb punishment. Canelo immediately fired back and began to counter and take Golovkin more serious because he just got seriously clipped, but for some reason, he decided to stay on the ropes. And Golovkin was extremely cautious when he threw because of Canelo's counterpunching, and every time he threw a punch, he would move his head out of the way to prepare for Canelo's counter. And after a minute of just sitting there doing nothing at all, Canelo finally decided to throw a combination and let his hands go. And I'm assuming he did this because he knew he was down and the round was coming to a close, so he wanted to leave a good impression on the judges. But Golovkin still managed to win the end of the round and win the round decisively in general. G landed 6 power punches in the round, which is the highest number of power punches in any round up to this point. So G was starting to make his mark. Canelo would actually meet Triple G in the middle of the ring at the start of round 6. G would land a good uppercut, and Canelo would come right back with a good right hand to the body. Golovkin then walked him over to the ropes where he landed 2 good right hands, but Canelo would come off the ropes and fight in the middle of the ring where he landed a very good right uppercut. But Golovkin soon started taking control again, because one thing Canelo was doing that gave him trouble was that he kept leaning towards Golovkin, and every time Canelo leaned his furthest towards Golovkin, G would jab him in the face. Halfway through the 6th, it was 5-5 and punches landed, and a very even fight, but Golovkin began to turn it up. He was throwing more combinations and going to the body more. Golovkin ended up landing more power shots than he did jabs, and was really starting to punish Canelo when he got him on the ropes. It was a very good round for Golovkin. And we are halfway through, so let's take a look at the scorecard and punches through 6 rounds. Through 6 rounds, Golovkin was beating Alvarez in every department except for body punching. G landed 17 more punches overall, 9 more jabs, and 8 more power. But Canelo was still managing to stay in the fight because of his counterpunching and explosive flurries. But Golovkin had just won 3 rounds in a row, so Canelo had to fight harder if he wanted to win the fight. Golovkin started round 7 methodically stalking and backing up Canelo, and Canelo wasn't going on the ropes as much in this round, which would make him even more tired because he was just moving away from Golovkin the entire time. And there's not much more to say about the 7th round. Golovkin was outworking Canelo and putting the pressure on. He was having success with his jab and landing more punches. But Canelo was able to stay in the fight with the occasional counterpunch. Before the 8th round started, you could get a sense of what was going on in the fight by just looking at the body language of each fighter in their corner. Golovkin was ready to fight and got off his stool 5 seconds before the bell rung, while Canelo was sitting exhausted in his stool and didn't get up until the exact second the bell rung. And we would see this exhaustion more and more because in the 8th, Canelo would keep himself on the ropes more often than before, and you could see his mouth wide open, gasping for air. But Canelo showed his warrior mentality and decided to play a dangerous game and tried standing in the middle of the ring with Golovkin. And because he's such a great fighter, he had success doing this, but he just couldn't keep up the pace for the entire round. Gennady got Canelo in a corner and landed a very nicely set up left uppercut. He threw a jab, then took a step to the left and fired his uppercut. It was a perfectly placed shot. And at this point, Canelo was really starting to be bullied by Golovkin and couldn't control where he was going. He kind of just let Golovkin move him to wherever part of the ring he wanted because he was so tired. And the only thing that Canelo was doing to make this fight competitive was landing pot shots. And he soon landed a great right uppercut on Golovkin, but once again, it was only one compared to Golovkin's many. And right after Canelo landed it, Golovkin went right back to work. And while Canelo was doing mostly boxing up to this point, he legit started to run away at the end of the 8th. Like, not boxing, like look, he's literally running away from Golovkin. In round 9, Canelo came out and met Golovkin in the middle of the ring and started throwing bombs, but Golovkin showed great defense and blocked Canelo's punches with his gloves, no issue. It seemed that Canelo felt a sense of urgency because he must have known he was losing the fight up to this point and had to change something to win. Golovkin caught Canelo with a good straight right hand, and Canelo immediately came back and landed one of his best punches of the fight, a left hook that landed perfectly on the face of Gennady. Canelo started letting his hands go more and catching Golovkin with some great punches, but he started to get tired again and Golovkin was getting him onto the ropes. While Golovkin was backing Canelo up, Canelo landed a beautiful counter right hook bomb that hit Golovkin right on the chin. And nothing. The man simply blinked.
First half of the 9th round for him.
And the scary thing was, Canelo could crack. He was a hard-hitting puncher, but he landed his very best punch on Triple G, a punch that famously knocked out quite a few boxers, but Golovkin ate it like he was Captain Crunch. But while Canelo was having success, Golovkin always had that jab of his to keep him head-to-head with Canelo. And the round was extremely close. Did you like the activity and work rate of Golovkin, or did you like the counter-punching and boxing by Canelo? Well, in this round, I certainly feel Canelo had the edge. He landed the cleanest power punches and most power punches in this round than any other round up to this point, and he was letting his hands go a lot more. So Canelo would take round 9. Now, rounds 10, 11, and 12. Here we go. Both guys started trading, and Canelo eventually caught Golovkin with a great right hand to the head and knocked him off balance. And because Canelo was so confident in his power, he looked at Golovkin's feet and figured he was hurt. But clearly in the replays, they show it was a balanced punch. But it was a nicely set up punch by Alvarez and a good parry afterwards. When Canelo tried to go for the kill, he let his hands go and landed a good shot. But Golovkin jabbed him in the face 3 times in a row, with every single jab snapping his head back. And even though Canelo did a nice job early on in the round, he wasn't able to stay on Golovkin, and Golovkin was landing really good shots while Canelo seemed to be winded from throwing so much from earlier. And even though overall in the round I feel Canelo landed the better punches, Triple G was just too active not to give him round 10. Canelo started to use a lot of energy in round 11, moving around the ring a bunch and landing some nice counter shots. Canelo had a great start to the round, but Golovkin's jab began to put the fight into his hands. but Canelo would land 2 really good right hands on Golovkin that put the fight back into his hands. And after that, Golovkin would use the jab to take control of the round again. It was an extremely close back and forth round. Golovkin soon landed a killer left hook on Canelo that somehow Canelo ate, but I don't think it was enough to take control of the round. And as much as I don't like doing this, I have to give this round 10-10 because I really can't decide who won it. Golovkin landed more punches, but Canelo landed some bombs in this round and landed more power punches. But without further ado, the 12th and final round. Here we go. Canelo started round 12 extremely quick. He was throwing combos and countering every punch that Golovkin threw. He started to land flush, and it was obvious that he was going hard because he knew he was down. And soon he threw a 7-punch combo with most punches landing on Golovkin, and all G did was nod his head, which has to be terrifying for Canelo. But Golovkin wouldn't just allow Canelo to dominate him like this, so he would come back with an 11-punch combination and land a ton of power shots and jabs on Canelo's face. But Canelo's early bull rush, few jabs, and powerful counters gave him the advantage overall in round 12. Golovkin did a great job coming back in the round, but Canelo just did too good early and landed clean counters during Golovkin's success in the later half. This was the only round in the fight where Canelo outlanded Golovkin in punches, and he landed 10 power punches, the highest number of power punches landed in a round all night compared to 7 power punches in round 9.
Golovkin finished with a small rally. The crowd is going berserk. They love the action they saw.
So before we go into my final scorecard, let's look at the punches landed. So in the second half of the fight from rounds 6 through 12, Golovkin outlanded Canelo by 35 punches, but Canelo was able to score 14 more power punches. And here are the final punch stats for the entire fight. Golovkin landed 163 punches. He landed 118 jabs, 45 power punches, and 5 body punches. Canelo landed 111 punches. He landed 60 jabs, 51 power, and 14 body punches. Golovkin overall landed 52 more punches and 58 more jabs. Canelo had the edge in power punches and body shots. He landed 6 more power punches than Golovkin and beat him in body punches 14-5. My final scorecard was 117-113 in favor of Gennady Golovkin, or in other words, 7 rounds to 3 with 2 rounds even. But if you don't like even rounds and want a winner for each round, then I'd say the fight would be 116-112, 8 rounds to 4 for Gennady Golovkin. And this should be your card if you're not going to have any rounds. 8 rounds to 4 for Golovkin is the perfect card for this fight. The widest you could have it for Canelo is 7-5 for Golovkin, and the widest you could have it for Golovkin is 9 rounds to 3. But what did the judges think?
Adelaide Bird scores it 118-110 for Canelo. Dave Moretti scores it 115-113 for Triple G. And Don Trella scores it 114-114, a 3-way split. This is officially a draw.